Good evening. Welcome to the Lompoc City Council meeting. None of you that are here. And we will begin with a roll call.
Council Agency Member Martner. Present. Council Agency Member Costa.
Present.
Council Agency Member Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vice Chair Lingle.
Here.
Mayor Chair John Lynn.
Here. Okay, we could have your oral communications, except there's no one here to communicate with us. So we will be having a closed session covering 3 business items: conference with real property negotiations for 112 North H Street, 203 North N Street, et cetera, with regard to LHCDC and the city attorney and Steve Tabor, LHCDC's attorney. And then a conference with legal counsel on existing litigation, subdivision A of section 54956.9, Pacific Western Bank versus Lompoc Housing Community Development Commission et al., and Citibank NA versus Lompoc Community Housing Development Commission et al., and a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to subsection C of 54956.9, one matter regarding LHCDC, and the public employee performance evaluation for the city attorney. And we will now head off to the conference room. Good evening. Welcome to your Lompoc City Council meeting. Let's see, we had a closed session prior to this. We discussed some issues with regard to LHCDC and some forward progress with regard to those issues, but we have no reportable action. We also began the performance evaluation of the city attorney in closed session with just the council members, and we came to the conclusion that we needed some more information before we could go forward with that. So I'm charged with gaining that information, and that item is moved forward to the meeting of the 24th, the workshop. Yes, because the other one was scheduled for the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, so there we have all of that. Did I miss anything, Joe? Okay, good. All right, and now if we could have the invocation from Reverend Lingle. If you'd all rise, please.
Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for allowing us to live in this wonderful city. Not only this wonderful city, but this wonderful county and wonderful state. Heavenly Father, we have some very important times coming ahead. Started in Iowa today with some elections of our, elections of our next president. Please guide us in this nation in our wise decisions. Please guide this council this evening in making wise decisions to help lead this city. We want to thank you for bringing some of our troops home. We want to wish all troops, both present and abroad, that are still protecting us, to stay healthy, stay well, and hurry home. We also want to thank you for the wonderful holiday you just provided for all of us. My family was safe, and hopefully everyone else's family was safe. We had a wonderful time, and we want to thank you for that. In your name we pray, amen.
And now for the city administrator's report.
Honorable Mayor, City Council members, audience, and viewers. While tonight's City Administrator's report does not include status updates, I do have several announcements to make tonight. First, I take this opportunity to announce that Regional Executive Director Dan Powell of the Lompoc YMCA recently met with me to congratulate the City Council and staff, especially Recreation Manager Joanne Plummer and aquatic staff, on the current positive trend related to our aquatic center programs. As a result of the positive report presented to Council in November by Ms. Plummer, demonstrating increased program offerings, increased revenues, and decreased aquatic center general fund subsidy, Mr. Powell advised that while the YMCA will continue to partner with the city toward our common goal to provide quality recreation offerings to the Lompoc community, he does not foresee continued dialogue with the city regarding the Y's proposal to manage city aquatic operations. Mr. Powell further advised that the YMCA renovation project is underway at the Lompoc Family YMCA facility, noting when completed, the new state-of-the-art facility will help the Y meet the community's growing need for a place for youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility for all. He noted the YMCA will remain open while the facility is under construction through March 2012. The new features of the YMCA will include an expanded and updated wellness center, newly improved group exercise and youth development, as well as social centers and a new cycling studio. The city will continue to partner with the Lompoc Family YMCA, working together toward our common goals to provide the Lompoc community quality recreation and wellness programs. Second, I would report continued good news related to the preliminary reports Management Services Director Mr. Brad Wilkie recently received, advising the unadjusted third quarter results for Santa Barbara County sales tax revenue have been posted, showing Lompoc's local increase in sales tax at 10.23%. This is the second quarter in a row that Lompoc has realized increased sales tax, having sales tax increases of 10.7% during the second quarter. Next, I would announce that City Council will meet with all city standing commissions, committees, and boards throughout 2012, beginning with the Joint Council Commission meeting with the Public Safety Commission, scheduled for January 17th at 6:30 p.m., just prior to the regular council meeting of the 17th. The city clerk has provided council a list of all scheduled Joint Council Commission meetings for your reference and scheduling purposes. I would next announce that last month, Utility Director Ron Stassi submitted his retirement from the City of Lompoc effective December 30th. However, Mr. Stassi has agreed to work on a part-time, temporary basis until the position is filled to provide a smooth transition period. While Mr. Stassi is in a 2-week separation period, he will return to work on January 17th. Mr. Stassi has worked for the City of Lompoc 5 years and has made significant contributions to the betterment of the city, overseeing the city's largest CIP construction upgrade project, the city's regional wastewater facility upgrade. Additionally, it was Mr. Stassi's project oversight ensuring that downtown installation of the city clock, which was generously donated by the City of Lompoc Rotary Club. Lastly, the Lompoc Fire Department is planning to conduct live fire training burns from January 23rd to February 4th in the 900 block of West Apricot Avenue and Ocean Avenue. And Battalion Fire Chief Mark Clayton is here tonight, and I've asked him to provide a brief on the planned training burns and would at this time invite him to the podium.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Just thought I'd come up and give you a brief overview of what we're planning to do during that week of January 23rd. We don't often get this opportunity to burn structures under live fire conditions. And the County Housing Authority was kind enough to approach Allen Hancock College and myself and offer us 5 residential and 1 commercial building to actually burn. So this is a great opportunity that rarely comes up, and it's going to provide not only our city firefighters with much needed live fire training, but we're approaching this regionally and inviting all of our neighboring agencies to participate as they can. And that's an unusual opportunity for them as well. So basically we're going to have 10 burn days where firefighters will make entry into these structures under controlled live fire conditions, learn about fire behavior, fire control, how their equipment is best put to use, along with a bunch of other tactical training that goes with firefighting. So if I can answer any questions for you or provide any other information, please let me know.
Mark, you've been at this a while. I would like you to describe for the audience the difference between studying how to fight a fire in a classroom and going into a burning building, so people understand how terribly valuable this is.
Well, I think we could probably all relate. You know, when you go to a classroom and everything's theoretical, you draw it on the chalkboard. There is a whole science behind fire growth, how it develops, and then suppression tactics. And all of that's nice, hard science, but everything changes when you are sensory deprivated, you put on a pack and a bunch of protective gear and you actually go into what seems, especially when you're in it for the first time, an absolutely out of control environment. So what's really special about this training is for especially younger firefighters to make the connection between that hard science in the classroom and see that actually played out in a fire room, where they can connect those dots and see that applied science, if you will. And controlling these fires, we have several instructors that are skilled and experienced in doing this. They can take the crews that are in these fires step by step through the stages of development, and you can actually see what's happening and put a picture, if you will, to what you've already learned in the classroom. So it is absolutely, I wish that all academies could have a live fire training portion of their training so that they could go right from the classroom and see it in action. So that's what makes this so special, and it just does not happen. So we're really excited.
Absolutely, and we'll be even more excited when Hancock has the live fire building.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Councilmember Lingle.
That sort of segues into my question. You mentioned you wish that all academies could have something like this. When we've already broke ground on our public safety academy, how will what we're going to be doing with the structures, how will this different than what we'll experience in the academy, or in the public safety buildings?
It will be very similar, other than these are actual housing units, and we'll be putting furniture items and things that there'll probably be some restrictions on the public safety complex in terms of what we can burn. That'll probably be a natural gas, if I remember correctly. It'll be piped and controlled that way. This is actual hay, fusees, a much less controllable fuel, if you will. And we're actually in a home that people have lived in, so it's very realistic.
That's the other thing. These are homes that you'll know the outlay of the house. In a real fire, you come to my house, you don't know what my outlay is. So
No.
are people going to be going into these structures without knowing where the rooms are? Will everyone know where the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom is?
We have to, part of the safety items that we go through, there's a big checklist that we do before we actually set fires. Everybody's got to do a walkthrough and have a pre-burn briefing. So everyone that's going to go in will have laid eyes on kind of the layout just for safety purposes.
Good.
I wish we could do that with all the houses out there in the public. We'd have a better idea.
There you go.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I may not have caught this. Out of the 10 burn days, do we have the dates and locations of those?
Yes.
For the public? Do you have those with you this evening?
I do.
Can we read those off?
Sure. As Ms. Barcelona indicated, this is all in the 1,000 block or 900 and 1,000 block of West Apricot. And those are all county housing buildings. So the addresses will be 119 Dahlia, that little piece right by the post office of Dahlia. 906, 908 Apricot, that's a duplex. 910 Apricot. 1000, 1002 Apricot, 1004, 1006, and then the commercial county building at 917 West Ocean will be the last one. So.
Sorry, did the city administrator mention the dates of those?
We'll start burning on January 23rd, and everything will be burned to the ground by February 4th.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and Council, at this time I would defer to City Attorney Joe Pannoni, who will brief you on matters of the RDA.
Thank you, Ms. Barcelona. As the Council knows, and the public may know based on newspaper reports, the California Supreme Court, just before Christmas, decided, or just after Christmas, decided that that bill that the legislature had passed that you knew about that was going to dissolve redevelopment agencies was a valid act of the legislature. They did have the authority to dissolve redevelopment agencies. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court also said the other companion bill that the legislature passed that said the agencies, if they wanted to, could pay to stay in existence. The Supreme Court found that to be an invalid piece of legislation. So because of that, the Dissolution Act stayed in place, but the Extortion Act was thrown out. And so because of that, as of February 1st, 2012, your redevelopment agency will be dissolved. What that means is the redevelopment agency will no longer exist. And now what we'll do is go through this process that Dissolution Act set up to try to reasonably wrap up the agency's business. So the first thing that this council is going to need to do is by January 13th, 2012, you're going to have to adopt a resolution having the city be the successor agency to the redevelopment agency. Successor agency is a defined term in that law, AB 26, and what that successor agency will do is basically be the agency to continue to carry out the obligations that the agency has, the contractual obligations they have, and also to wrap up the agency business. Now, you could choose not to be the successor agency if you wanted. You'd also have to pass a resolution to do that. And if you did that, any other local entity who submitted a resolution to the county controller, auditor controller, could say they want to be Lompoc's successor agency, and they would be the successor agency. So my recommendation would be is that we have the city be the successor agency to the Lompoc Redevelopment Agency. Unfortunately, you'll have to have a special meeting to do that because this has to be done by January 13th. I know not all the council members are going to be here on January 10th, but it's next week that would be happening. So if you can meet on the 10th or the 11th, I could be here on the 10th or the 11th. My presence is absolutely necessary, so you can meet anytime you want it. But we need to have a resolution prepared, and we will do that. In addition, by January 13th, you also have another decision to make, which is to decide whether or not you want to take over the agency's housing responsibilities. And by those responsibilities, I mean enforce covenants that may exist, carry out, implement those agreements that already exist. For example, the Santa Rita Hills project, that has a signed agreement, so the agency has to carry out certain obligations. The housing authority or the substitute housing authority would take on those obligations. If you don't take on that obligation, then the local housing authority in the city of Lompoc will automatically take over those obligations. And since the city of Lompoc doesn't have its own housing authority, but there is a housing authority for the county, that would be the entity that takes over the housing responsibilities for the Lompoc Redevelopment Agency. As the successor agency, you will be entitled to continue to receive $250,000 a year to help administer that closing down of the redevelopment agency and carrying out those obligations you have to carry out. By January 17th, or at the January 17th meeting, I will be returning to you with another draft, what's called an initial recognized obligation payment schedule. You adopted one before, as you needed to, by the law that wasn't stayed by the Supreme Court. But because things have happened since then, there may be some amendments that need to be made to make sure it's up and current. So on at your January 17th meeting, we'll be bringing to you a resolution to adopt that draft recognized obligation payment schedule. And you'll understand later why that's important. Then on February 1st, as I said, the agency will be dissolved. At your second meeting in February, the City Council, acting as the successor agency, if you choose to be the successor agency, will then have to adopt the initial draft recognized obligations payment schedule for enforceable obligations. That's the tongue-twisting term that the document is called. And what that is the document that will show all of the existing obligations you have, that the agency has, that need to still be implemented. And the reason that's important is because the agency then, or the successor agency, will only be able to use agency money, whether it's existing agency money, or if that's not sufficient to carry out those obligations, new tax increment that will be coming in will be used to pay off those obligations. Then on May 1st, and that will be an ongoing situation. The successor agency will continue to do that as long as there are obligations the agency has to fulfill. A good example of that is your bond, for example. The bond you have, that's an agency obligation. The successor agency will end up being the one to continue to pay those debt service payments that need to be made. And if there's insufficient money on hand for the agency to continue to pay that, then you'll be getting annual allotments of tax increment that would have otherwise gone to the agency. It will still come to the successor agency, but only to take care of those existing obligations. As of May, and I know this is very difficult to keep track of, and this is only sort of the beginning. It's not the whole thing, but I'm not going to go through the whole thing tonight because I'm not sure I know how to go through the whole thing. So that the next thing that is important is the mayor has to make two appointments to this thing called the Oversight Board. Now, this Oversight Board is going to be made up of those two appointments, plus someone appointed by the county, plus someone appointed by the community college district, plus someone appointed by a large special district. I'm not really sure what that means, but that's what the law says. That oversight committee, or that oversight board, those appointments have to be, one of them can be whoever the mayor wants, and the other one has to be a redevelopment agency employee. So the mayor would have to appoint someone that worked with the agency, the Lompoc redevelopment agency, as a member of that oversight committee. That oversight committee's function will be, as it says, to oversee those things the successor agency is going to be spending money on. And that existing obligations list, they'll have to approve that existing obligations list. Once it's approved, we're hoping that the county will then, when they're supposed to give you the money to pay them, will just give you the money, as opposed to just hold on to the money and make you have to sue to get that money. But who knows what may happen. To assist the successor agency financially in doing that operation, you will be getting $250,000. The successor agency will get $250,000 a year to help administer that operation. But you only get that after you've provided a budget that's been approved by the oversight board. I don't know the timing of all that, but that's what's required. And I guess at this point, the one bottom line that may be important to understand is, as of February 1st, that's the easiest way to say it, as of February 1st, any money that the agency has on hand, whether it's in the agency coffers because of a bond or because they're holding tax increment that hadn't yet been expended, any money that the agency has that isn't needed to pay off existing obligations is going to get paid to the county. The county is going to take that money and put it into a trust fund. The same trust fund that the county is going to create for use of tax increment money. If the agency needs that money to pay off obligations, then obviously they don't have to pay the money to the county. They can just pay it directly to pay off those obligations and not have to get the tax increment from the county. An example of something that may have to happen, and I'm sorry for having to say a lot of maybes and mays because I'm not sure. For example, the agency has $700,000 remaining from that bond sale that you have used other proceeds for. That $700,000 may need to be used only to pay down the bond indebtedness you had, which in essence reduces the debt service the amount of debt service you'll have to pay, which again alleviates tax increment having to come back to the agency. Because remember, the whole purpose of this, from the state legislature's perspective, was to shift money that had been going to the agency to now go to pay off things the state had an obligation to pay off. Basically, education was the biggest thing that caused the state to want to do this. So as the days go on, we'll hopefully know more. We'll have more time to look at things, and there's groups that are getting together, law firms that represent redevelopment agencies, all trying to come up with some, so we're all sort of on the same page, so we're not doing things different because it's only going to be more confusing. And I just wanted to lay out the immediate things that need to happen, most importantly, the things that you'll have to choose to have a special meeting. And so we would like you to tell us tonight what day it is you want to have that special meeting to adopt that resolution. And you also need to decide whether or not you want to be the successor agency. I'm guessing yes to that. And you'll need to decide whether or not you want to take over the housing responsibilities. So do we have any ideas for dates for the...
One concern in that this was an agendized item, is that a difficulty?
Not picking a date, no. All you're doing is picking a date for a meeting.
Okay, so we're not trying to decide here whether or not we're going to become a successor agency?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Not tonight. Tonight you're just...
Councilmember Martner, could you teleconference for that single issue meeting?
Mr. Mayor, it depends on the date. We're talking about January 10th. Is that the concern?
10th or the 11th, at your convenience, because you're the one that's out
the 11th
of here.
is out for me. The 10th is the
10th
only
is
time
the
that
one.
I could teleconference.
Okay. Is that good for everybody else? Okay, so we'll have a special meeting on January 10th.
And the time?
At 7 p.m.
Okay.
to deal with this sequence of issues.
Deciding whether or not to be the successor agency and deciding whether or not to take on the housing responsibilities.
What he said. Just for your reference, the largest district in the city is the hospital district. So now you know one more thing, because I had a different answer, and someone said, well, what about the hospital district? And I went, you kind of take them for granted. They've been here longer than almost everybody. If I might, could we possibly at that meeting talk about the ownership of various agency properties and how that goes forward?
Sure, the successor agency, actually, all of the assets, it's easy, simple, not easy. All of the assets of the agency will then become assets of the successor agency.
But would we be required to sell those assets?
The goal of the successor agency is to, for lack of a better way to describe it, create cash, again, to relieve the responsibility of the agent of the state to have to pay for certain things that the agency was doing. So, yes, the goal will be to sell them. However, you don't have to, if some of the properties are properties that you own that there's a valid public purpose economic development, you could retain that property for the purpose of doing economic development.
Well, just for discussion's sake, the redevelopment agency owns the downtown parking lots. Would we be required to sell the downtown parking lots?
No,
to
because they're
reimburse the
serving a
agency?
purpose now. The city can retain, the agency won't own them anymore, the city will own them, and the city can use them as a parking lot.
And we would not be required to reimburse the agency for some really large amount of money. Okay, and this, another one that comes to mind is that vacant parcel across from the fire station that we purchased to put in a parking lot and have not been able to do so yet. And well, actually, the agency owns that parcel, but the parking lot was never put in. So that might be something we'd kind of like to talk
That may be
about.
something that we may have to figure out a value for.
And similarly, the pool and the community center. And so if you would be prepared to talk about those various properties that the agency has, the theater.
You mean the new community center?
Yeah.
I thought that was a city property.
It's a city property, but a very substantial amount of our redevelopment agency money is going
That's
into
okay.
it.
That's an obligation that the city, the agency can continue, the successor agency can continue to pay for the construction of that facility.
And when it's paid for, it becomes the city's property in
It
total.
is the city, yes, it is the city's property now.
And then
The agency was building it for the city.
there are also a number of loans that the agency has made, the Lompoc Theater and other properties. If you could be prepared to address those.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything else that another council member would like to have addressed, aside from you with the light on, Councilmember Costa? Sorry.
Thank you, Marilyn. City Attorney, I don't know if this is something to address now or if you can address it during that meeting, but is there, and Mr. Wilkie, possibly you as well, is there not an issue with the debt service, though? I know that we had discussed this previously. When something's amortized, sometimes you're not even allowed to pay larger lump sums because that contract is amortized out over those period of years. Does that make sense?
Yes. So sometimes the bondholders, the bonds can't be what's called defeased. But all that means is the $700,000 just has to be set aside, and whenever the debt service is required, it'll come out of that $700,000, not somewhere else.
But once that money's put aside, then that allocation would discontinue to come to the city.
Only for as long as the $700,000 remains. If the $700,000 isn't enough to pay off the entire bond, which I'm sure it's not, then the tax increment would continue to come
Until we have enough set aside for that.
until the bonds are paid off.
Okay, thank you.
And having tried to read AB 126, I got to about page 18. Your explanation is very helpful. If anyone needs something to put them to sleep, I urge you to download and read that. City Administrator, is that all?
No other things tonight. Thank you.
Okay. No other announcements. Okay. Oral communication. This particular oral communication is if, number one, you want to talk to us about something that's not on the agenda, or if there's something on the agenda, you don't want to stay very long, but there's only 2 items, so I would ask you to hold on until we get to the item. Is there anyone here to talk about anything other than the 2 items that are on the agenda? Going once, going twice? No, you're coming up. You're the second item on the agenda. Yeah. Sold. Okay. Oh, sorry. Missed one. Come on down.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is James Downey. I'm a resident of Lompoc. I have been for 10 years. I'm a homeowner. I have a question this evening about the LHCDC. I'm late to this party. The first time I heard of it was before December 20th. That's the only council meeting that I've observed, and I learned a little there, so I apologize in advance if I ask something that's already been answered, or if I can find the information somewhere else, I'd appreciate that direction. I'm affiliated with a group, loosely, a group called Occupy Lompoc. We have spent a number of Saturdays on the corner of H and Ocean trying to exercise our rights of free speech and to assemble, believing that that lot was a public park, in as much as it's called Sculpture Park and has been as long as I can remember. And we learned some weeks ago that perhaps it's no longer a park, or at least that issue is up in the air. We were notified by the police by unsigned letter that the property was had been that a deed of in lieu of foreclosure had been recorded, and that we were currently trespassing, and we were given an hour to leave the property. Since that time, we've been told that we have a 12-foot easement on the boundaries of the property that are still within the public domain, as far as we know or anyone else has told us. And we have continued to assemble there on the weekends. We obviously, excuse me, honored the police request for us to vacate the property. We believed at the time that the that there would be signs posted on the property of no trespassing. We have observed other individuals temporarily utilizing the property, and we're not sure the status of this property. We would like to know what the status of it is. We believe it. We'd like to see it remain in the public domain, in as much as the location is, you know, in the middle of town. And we actually had discussed whether or not we might have the opportunity to help maintain the property and beautify the property, since we were going to be on it. But obviously, those things have been put up in the air for now. And so my question really is to the councils, if anyone can tell us what the status of that property is, if you can't, when that might occur, and if we have any hope or expectation that that property might remain in the public domain.
Okay, let me explain the sequence of events with the property. That property, along with other properties in downtown, was put together as for a redevelopment effort by LHCDC, with some city money involved in some portions of it, not with this portion. And they were the owners of the property, although they obviously owed money for it. As that organization is dissolving, one of their acts that they took was to return the property to the person they owed the money to, and that's what a deed in lieu is. Basically, I give you your property back, and you forgive my debt, and I give you your property. It never was a public park. It was, I guess I would say, a private public park, because the property was always owned by someone other than a governmental agency. And again, in the interest of beautification, the metal sculptures were placed there, and it just kind of went along. And then after it was returned to the property owner, I can't speculate on his reasons, but I'm sure insurance was at the head of the hit parade. He took an action which you guys came in up on the short end. I'm not familiar with the 12-foot easement. And yeah, I got a blank look over there, so I don't think I could address that. I'd be happy to find out for you. The course of action might be to go to the county and look up who the recorded property owner is and contact that property owner and see if you could make an arrangement with them, either to rent the property or, you know, whatever was mutually acceptable between the two of you.
So it's your understanding that the city has no longer has any interest in that?
We never did in that particular parcel. We have money invested in the theater building itself, but LHCDC had brought that parcel in along with other parcels to have the entire block for redevelopment. But that one we never really had, and we were not directly involved in. And the sculpture park there was an effort on behalf of LHCDC to beautify the corner.
Okay. And so you don't anticipate in the future any involvement in the city in that property? I
don't know how we would possibly pay for it. the mechanism we might have used in a prior life would have been the redevelopment agency. We were just talking about that as the vanishing entity.
Right. And what I was referring more to, though, however, was a possible agreement with the private party to maintain that property and gain access for the city, as opposed to an individual organization.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to talk about that because I'm not allowed to talk about that. So, Mr. Pannoni.
Just for clarification, the reason the mayor is not allowed to talk about that is because under the state law, a council member can't discuss possible acquisition of property if it's within a certain radius of property that they have an interest in, and so actually two of the council people have that problem, or issue, not a problem, have that issue. I don't know of any interest that I've heard that this council has expressed to do what you just suggested. It may be something that we have pretty consistently had on the agenda closed sessions to discuss the LHCDC items. I'm sure it will be on the next closed session agenda too, and that's something that maybe the council will want to think about, but it's up to the council.
I appreciate that. Final question, if I may, are you able to describe the scope of the study which the city is currently undertaking to reveal the details of the properties that are held or by LHCDC? I mean, in the last meeting, I understood that there was $15,000 allocated for an outside consultant to come in and assist the city staff to, I thought I heard, determine the current status of all the properties that.
The consultant was hired specifically to answer a group of questions that council members asked, and one of them was the legal status of the various properties. Okay. So if you wanted to see me after the meeting, I could provide you with a list of their properties.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate very much the time, and I do not envy you your task, and I'm grateful to you all for your service to your community.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on a general subject?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Mark Kargasaki, and I'm the owner of Halama Wines and Joseph Blair Wines, located in the Lompoc Wine Ghetto. I'm here today to ask the council to investigate a conflict of interest on the Planning Commission. I have gone through the normal complaint-driven channels with no satisfaction. Back in the spring of 2010, the Wine Ghetto had only a handful of tasting rooms due to the permit rules. The rules, as I'm sure you are aware, were that tasting rooms could only be in winery production facilities and only occupy 15% of the space. We had issues with the way these rules hobbled the local wine industry, so at the direction of the Planning Department, we filed an official complaint with the city to force the issue to be examined and have the rules changed. This is exactly what happened, and the result was that tasting rooms could operate in the area without complying with the winery and space rules if they had a conditional use permit. Everyone here can agree that this has been a great boon for the area. There are now 16 tasting rooms in the Wine Ghetto, with more in the city center. By this time, Flying Goat Cellars had already moved their production facility to their new location on Laurel Avenue, but still maintained their space in the ghetto as their tasting room. Kate Griffith sits on the Planning Commission. She married the owner of Flying Goat Cellars, and it is my understanding that she is now half owner of the winery. The complaint against Flying Goat was investigated, and somehow they were found to be in compliance with the law. The Planning Department told me that they told the investigator that they used their ghetto facility for pack and ship, which is actually done off-site at Vintegrated Solutions. Fast forward to now. The Wine Ghetto is booming. A great many of the places there have conditional use permits, all of which have cost business owners around $1,500. Flying Goat Cellars and owner Kate Griffith still do not have one. We filed yet another complaint this fall and submitted photographs showing the space as a tasting room and art gallery. So did at least one other tasting room owner. We have been told that even after another investigation, they are still in compliance. According to the current zoning, Flying Goat's tasting room and office space must not total more than 187 square feet or 14 by 13 feet, which basically clearly shows that this is not the case. I have photographs that I can pass to you guys that you guys can take a look at if you would like, that shows the tasting room. At the very least, they are being deceptive to the investigators. Their entire space is a tasting room and an office. I know that some of you sitting here on the council know this firsthand. We ask for a level playing field. Those of us that have just tasting rooms or use more than 15% of our spaces for tasting rooms had to obtain these permits and pay the fees. I'm asking the council why someone can sit on the planning commission with apparent contempt for these rules and feels they do not apply to her when money is involved. To me, this indicates an abuse of Kate's position for personal monetary gain. I ask that this be investigated further and that Kate be reviewed for her position on the planning commission. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a new. Okay, this is kind of a new piece of ground. City Attorney, what would the options be with regard to this?
If, as the speaker said, a complaint has been filed, then it will be followed up on with, and I see your Economic Development Director, Assistant City Administrator taking notes, so since it's her department, I'm assuming that her department will end up conducting an investigation.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I'm sorry, I believe that I heard the speaker as well say that they already received the response, which was that they were in compliance.
I heard that too, but I'm hearing that there's the complainant was not, was in essence filing an oral complaint tonight to follow up on that, and so further investigation will be done.
Thank you.
City Administrator, do you need any instruction with regard to this, or do you see a path of action?
Investigation will be done with the complaint.
Bring that follow-up back to the council. Okay.
Just for clarification, you mean give you a memo letting you know what's happening, not bring the complaint back to you?
No, a memo. Everybody comfortable with that? Okay. Sorry, guys, got to write notes. Okay, anything else at this time? Seeing no one else, we'll go forward. Okay, the next we have is the consent calendar. This will be approval of the minutes for the meeting of December 20th. I think there's one correction. Did you give that to the city clerk? Okay. And approval of expenditures, payroll voucher, 1.441 million, expense voucher, 895,000, expense voucher, 1,354,000. I will not participate in check number 302883 for $6.30 to Speedy Lock and Safe. Item number 3, summary of action, adoption of ordinance number 1580 sub 12, adding section 1.04.025 to the Lompoc Municipal Code relating to the reference to city departments positions, follow up on the fiscal year 2011-13 department consolidations. This is the second reading. Item number 4, award of a contract to Cannon Associates for professional services for project CS11-S-4, the Central Avenue and H Street intersection improvements. And number 5, resolution 5761 sub 12, authorizing the destruction of city attorney records per the attached list. And are there any items someone would like to have pulled or ask a question about now? Councilmember Acosta.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. This edit may have already been suggested, but on page 6 of 9 of the minutes, the paragraph right before the action that was taken. It states Councilmember Costa asked Councilmember Lingle what has prompted his change in allowing the code enforcement program to remain as complaint-based voluntary compliance. I actually asked Councilmember Starbuck. And then the second sentence, again, it says Councilmember Lingle. It should say Councilmember Starbuck stated his changes based on the success of the current graffiti abatement program.
I have a clear memory that Councilmember Costa did ask Councilmember Starbuck.
Yep. About the graffiti abatement program, correct. So just, yeah, it was Councilmember Starbuck for both of those sentences. And then the other thing I think that these are great minutes. I was reviewing them, and I think that this is definitely what we've been asking for. But on page 5 of 9, the paragraph after public comment, it states, she thanks staff for the report and is in favor of the RESPECT program. Although that's partially true, I was also in favor of a hybrid thereof between the two programs, or some kind of hybrid program. So just adding something about my support of the idea of a hybrid as well. Please. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other changes? Oh, it's Councilmember Lingle.
Not a change, just a comment. Item number 5, the shredding of the city attorney doc records. It's a very small dollar item it's only $721, but we're using a shred company out of San Luis Obispo, and I believe there is a shred company here in Lompoc, and if there is that possibility in the future, I'd like to see local businesses being used for that. Even though it is a very small amount, I think every dollar staying in Lompoc would help. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Seeing nothing, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes. And a second.
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Martiner, seconded by Councilmember Starbuck. And is there any further discussion? Seeing no lights lit, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. Thank you. And moving on to appointments. The first one would be the selection of a mayor pro tem. Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In keeping with a tradition that is very short, but it's almost 4 years old now, when Councilmember Martiner and I were elected in 2008, I nominated Councilmember Martiner as a mayor pro tem because she was the highest vote getter at that time. So keeping with that tradition, I would like to recommend Councilmember Starbuck as our mayor pro tem, since he was the highest vote getter in this last election. That's if he accepts.
Do we have to second?
Yes, absolutely.
I second.
Okay. And I would personally like to say that I'd love to have Councilmember Starbuck for mayor pro tem, because whenever no one else can go, he always seems to be able to fill in for me, and I truly appreciate it. So, my phone broke. So it's been moved and seconded that Councilmember Starbuck become our mayor pro tem. And is there any discussion on that? Could we vote, please? It does rotate. And that would pass 5-0. Congratulations. You don't get a gavel. Yeah. I think you could just weld one up. Okay, and now the review of appointments to the commissions and committees. And I'm confused. Oh, this is a review of this sheet. Yes, Stacy? No. I got it. Okay. Okay. I guess I would start out by saying, is there anyone who's currently serving and is unwilling to serve at what they're currently doing? Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am an alternate in the NCPA, and due to my recent work schedule, I won't really be able to be going to Sacramento anytime during the year. So in fairness to Councilmember Lingle, if he cannot go, he probably would like to have an alternate that can go. So I would request that some other council member steps up and takes that alternate position.
Okay. Is there someone who would love to volunteer to go to Sacramento? And I know it's not me.
Marilyn, I'll be there for policy committee meetings, and it may just coincide perfectly. 4 times a year that I'll be there, but it may not. So I'm fine with taking it on either way. Hopefully we'll be able to schedule it, but I'm fine because I may be there and just extend my stay.
Okay, so I will put you in for that.
It's my belief we should probably also take Ron Stassi's name off, as he'll be leaving us shortly as well.
Not until he goes. He has to be on here until we replace him.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other changes on here?
I do have Mr. Mayor, I do have I guess not an issue, but Councilmember Costa is the alternate for the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District, which I am the member. Those meetings also do meet on Thursdays, which are the same time that the NCPA meetings meet.
Is this incorrect? Because this says that those are the 3rd Thursdays and CPA is the 4th Thursday.
Oh,
Different weeks.
my apologies.
And my offer still stands. If someone would like me to be there, the alternate to APCD, I'm already there because of the other meeting that I'm already there for. So if you want to give that one up, I'll be happy to do it. And if you want to keep it, I'm all good with that too.
I'm comfortable keeping it. I haven't needed to attend a meeting yet, so if it becomes a burden, I'll bring it back to council.
Okay.
The one suggestion I have, just for logistical purposes, the CAC meetings, the status says that they meet the first Monday. It's actually the first Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. in Solvang, not in Buellton.
Okay, so we'll correct that. The first Wednesday?
Mm-hmm. In Solvang.
Solving, okay. Okay, are there any other changes to this? So the changes that I have, and then I'll accept a motion, would be that the CAC meeting is the first Wednesday in Solvang, and that Councilmember Costa is now the alternate to the NCPA. And there are no other changes, and everyone else agrees to do those things. And I would accept a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. Thank you. And now we have the appointment of committee members. And these are for terms for the single-purpose committee to review the future uses of the old municipal pool. And David Martinez is my nominee for that one. And whose nominee is Nicole?
Nicole Barnick is mine.
Okay. So, are either David or Nicole here? No. Okay. I would accept a motion to, and if there's any discussion, accept a motion to approve these. Councilmember Martin?
So moved.
No, she beat you to it.
Okay.
So move. I do have a question.
Surely.
Or I guess a point of discussion. There are 5 vacancies. Well, there will be 3 vacancies after if these 2 residents are appointed. I have not succeeded in finding somebody, so I would like to see how can we get the other 3 appointments. I understand the city just, post this, but what other way can we try to get more community involvement? I know, and I would like to ask Councilmember Starbuck, because it was him who started this project. Do you know what is the reason? People might just not understand or know really what the purpose of this committee is.
Well, I mean, I've read it off. I know that it's been published and all. I've had several people approach me about wanting to be on the committee.
Could you encourage them to apply?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even need to contact council members. All they can do is just come into the city hall and fill up an application, and then we can just, review the applications. But that would be great.
Yeah, I think the way that it had been written in the past is that it would be a council appointment. So I think that a lot of people that may have had interest in being on the committee didn't even bother to apply because of the appointment. So if you have nobody in mind, sure, we'll solicit inputs.
I think in general, it's a good thing that, even though there are council appointments, we do take applications from the general public and we draw on that pool, even though we might not necessarily know the individuals. So please encourage people that have talked to you about it to come to City Hall and fill an application and then put it on, the next agenda.
Yeah, there's one more person that actually spoke to me, but I'd already committed to David beforehand, so I'll ask him to apply. Okay, so all of you sitting out there in the audience and all of you at home, this is your opportunity to be involved in your city government and help us find how to fix and or reuse the old pool. Bring your skills and come on down. It pays nothing except a lot of thank yous, and we appreciate your help. Okay. Got to vote. And that passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay. All right. Moving on to our next item, item 9, I'm sorry, approval of requests for proposal to prepare reports supporting an update of the Lompoc City's developer impact fees. And Brad, come on down.
Mayor, council members, before I get into the staff report, I would like to just go over this one-page outline I just gave you that kind of gives a little bit of background and general information about impact fees, and there are a few schedules out in the back lobby too in case people want to follow along. There's been some discussion about impact fees over the last few months, and this was brought tonight because of questions that came up in November on the annual report that was prepared and submitted, as well as the workshop. First couple things are kind of basic. Impact fees are monies collected through a set schedule. We have a schedule that was put into place through the resolution that adopted the impact fees. They're spelled out in our local resolution number 5135 from 2003. They're only levied against new development. It wouldn't apply to existing development unless that existing development expands in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't apply to existing building stock, whether or not it's residential or commercial. So if someone was just opening up a new shop, some commercial shop, resident, retail, it wouldn't necessarily trigger any impact fees. Having said that, if a new business comes into town, builds a building from scratch, they would be subject to those impact fees because of building that new development. Impact fees are there to support infrastructure needed to serve that new infrastructure, new development. What they cannot do is they cannot pay for general revenue purposes. They can't be used for operations and maintenance of existing facilities or new facilities for that matter. They cannot be used to replace existing infrastructure unless there's a nexus between that facility being expanded to accept the new development. And the other thing is that they can only be used for the proportional share of the new development on a facility. If a new facility is built that can be used by everybody, only the portion that is being built that serves that new population could be applied against the impact fees. The rest of it would have to come from some other source. The specific fees that are set out in our schedule are itemized out from several different sources: park improvements, park acquisition, water and sewer, and continues on. The fees that are collected under any of those individual components can only be used for the infrastructure that's being prepared for that. So, for instance, impact fees that are collected for the library can't then be used once we spend it on wastewater facilities, for instance. The development impact fees that are specifically for park improvements and park acquisitions only apply to new development that's not covered by the Subdivision Map Act. The Subdivision Map Act has a mechanism called the Quimby fees that provides for a mechanism to collect fees for parks in circumstances where a large subdivision is being created. So this would only apply to individual homes that are being built by the owner, individual activities like that. Another aspect of park fees is that it's only applied to residential development. If somebody's building a new office, park fees are not collected. That's true for impact fees as well as Quimby park fees. Other impact fees that are not applicable to commercial or industrial development include recreation facilities, the library impact fees, as well as the bikeway facilities. For water and sewer, those are only imposed if a water meter is installed or a larger water meter installed compared to what was originally there. So somebody building on a lot may not necessarily have to have an impact fee for water and sewer if there's an existing water meter there that they can utilize. The California Government Code, Section 66,000 and others, specifically defines how an impact fee is set up, what you have to do. The report that I presented back in November was part of the requirements of the title, and that's mostly what I have to say about the general nature of impact fees. And now I'll just go on to highlight some of the items that are in the staff report. I won't read it verbatim, it's 10 pages long. The reason this is here tonight is because of the 2 meetings in November that this came up as an item. It's one of the outstanding requests from the series of activities that got us to this point, and it's also included in the economic development goal of the council. I was reviewing the video of those 2 meetings, and there have been several studies that have been done. The first one in 1989, another one in May of 1990, and the last one was in 2003. The one in 2003 had many reports and studies that were done in preparation for the impact fee study, one of which was the 15-year capital improvement plan, and several parts of the 1997 general plan were in place in time for this to be reviewed in 2003. Several other projects, and a significant one is the wastewater plant. There were several studies that were done in preparation for putting the wastewater plant together, so that all those were incorporated into the study as well in 2003. Give you an idea, I took out a couple numbers out of the capital improvement program. The police facilities and equipment, the request for the 2002 through 2017 capital improvement plan was approximately $6.5 million. For fire protection, it was about $6.3 million. And for park acquisition and development, it was about $13.6 million. Those improvements were incorporated into the impact fees that are out there today. How the differentiation between the park impact fees and the police and fire fees was a creature of that proportionality that was done through the impact fee study. I keep mentioning the capital improvement plan because it was a fairly integral part of the development of the impact fee study. Without a successor capital improvement plan, we'll have to have a lot of input from the departments to come up with what they think are the needed improvements, whether they have not been done yet under this current plan or future improvements that have come to light since 2002. Another thing that should be fairly critical to this process are the steps that you will be taking in the next 4 to 5 meetings, the special meetings for the general plan that actually is being talked about in the item after this. The circulation element especially will be critical to the impact fee study because it will determine the scope of the improvements that have to be done to implement the general plan. And that scope has a direct bearing on how much new development will have to pay for those improvements. The decision on where and how many and how much land will be developed over the next 30 years or 20 years, as far out as the new general plan goes, will also dictate how much the general plan, the impact fee study, should incorporate going forward. The November 1st meeting, it was brought up that there could be some additional fees collected for fire and police. On a staff level, there's probably going to be some opportunities to incorporate evaluations of other fees, and specifically the recent state mandate that provides for fire sprinklers in single-family and duplex dwellings. That's affected the minimum size requirements for our water meters. So my suggestion, if we go forward with this, is that we should look at that to see if we need to modify the impact fee for water meters because of this new requirement. Let's see. In reviewing for the staff report, I looked at and asked for some help from the planning department. Vested tentative maps would automatically be under the existing impact fee schedule. And in the report on page 5, there's a schedule of all the existing tentative maps and the approximate number of units that are under those tentative maps. So if we went forward with this impact fee study, these approximately 1,000 units that are already on the books waiting to be developed would be under the existing fee structure. The housing element predicts that there will be about 1,700 new homes, new EDUs, between now and 2014. Whether that actually pans out with the economy, it's hard to tell. But what that tells me is there's approximately 700 homes that will likely be developed between now and 2014 that could be subject to a new fee schedule if one was developed and implemented through a study. I mentioned the general plan. The land use element that's in the general plan update provides for several tools that helps identify the areas where mitigations have to happen because of new development. And it provides for development agreements between the city and the new developer that would help allow us to pinpoint the type of fees that we want to collect whether the development impact fees or development agreement fees, which are slightly different. I mentioned earlier that the capital improvement plan was a critical component. It had approximately $150 million worth of improvements that were necessary. I looked at that and have to keep this in mind, that this was done in 2002, which was significantly in front of when we got the design plans for the wastewater plant, but it anticipated about $32 million for the wastewater plant. Obviously, it was more than that, but that 150 was a guess, an educated guess, an estimate at the time of the improvements that needed to be done. That $150 million had a significant driver for the impact fee study that was done. There are several items that we've accomplished over the last few months that are necessary, would be necessary or helpful in this process. The water management plan is one. The components of the general plan that have already been updated, the EIR, housing element, those are things that would be useful for this. The things that have not been done, I would recommend that we pursue those prior to going fully into getting the impact fee study done. That may delay the time 3, 6, maybe 9 months, but it would be probably better to do that than to do it now before some of those pieces are determined. The current suspension of the street impact fees has the resolutions that were passed for those specifically says that they will be reviewed after the circulation element of the general plan is adopted, and that can be well said for the impact fees in general, is that to be able to get a good number for the street impact fees, we have to have that circulation element, and that circulation element has to be done before we can even consider what the costs are that can be passed on to new development. I guess I'm saying all this in summary is that it will be a very good thing for us to have a new set of impact fees in place before the next wave of development happens. I don't really expect that to happen earlier than 2015, and I don't think the state of California does either, because they have granted tentative map extensions for most of our tentative maps up to approximately 2016. So the ones that are on books may not be developed within the next couple of years, probably not within the existing budget period. So this is ultimately something we probably could do in the 13-15 budget cycle. And if we want to do it earlier than that, we can get some of these other studies that are in the wings and could probably be done within a short amount of time, depending how long the general plan goes, before we go forward with this. I included in the staff report, and this will be my final thing, that if we want to do a study, a user fee study might be something that could provide some benefits in a shorter term than the development impact fee study, only because it would provide some guidance as to how much we're maybe not collecting on certain fees. It would also validate whether our fees are in compliance with Prop 26, and it could also facilitate some of the goals that the council has in fostering some of the activities by discounting some of our fees to provide for what you want to do with some of your goals, specifically possibly the goal of compliance of on-road vehicles. So with that, I'll conclude this report. I'm here to answer any questions, and the recommendation is either give us direction to go forward with the study or to defer it until we have some more of the backup done.
Councilmember Starbuck?
Yeah. Mr. Wilkie, I appreciate all the effort you put into this. I'll refer back to the November meetings. One of the things I know that we discussed heavily was the use of impact fees as a carrot. I used the word carrot specifically to try and describe ways we could bring infill into the city. of the 12 impact fees, probably 6 of them would be very waivable for things within inside the redevelopment area. Obviously, parks will have nothing to do with commercial within the redevelopment. The acquisition of parks wouldn't. Recreation centers would be a very simple fee for us to waive currently. Street improvements is currently waived. Traffic signals are all in place within inside the redevelopment agency, and bikeways are already marked. So I think my intent in November about using impact fees is for redevelopment infill is where I think I was going with that. Obviously, our impact fees do need to be updated. I would, like you recommended, I think the 2013-2015 budget cycle would be a good time to do it. When you look at our capital improvement plan, yeah, it was done in '03, same time as our impact fee studies, but it's all the way out to 2017, which carries us 2 years beyond the next budget cycle. And when you read through the capital improvement program, the accomplishments are very minimal of what's in there. Probably the only thing that's really going to change significantly is going to be the cost of some of these improvements. So I don't think that it would be wise for this council to spend almost $100,000 on budgeted money right now to do this, but I think that this is something we should consider doing in our next budget cycle because it will come in prior to the 2015 ramping of homes. Like you say, we've already got this list of homes that are already approved at the old impact fee schedule. Those are probably the ones that are going to build first. So, I mean, that's what I would like to recommend. I would like maybe we look at what we could do to promote infill in Lompoc. We have a vacant lot. We can't use the impact fees to provide, repair infrastructure, but we can waive them, maybe get somebody to build something on that lot. And that's kind of where I would like to go with the impact fees. And then obviously, I mean, I would like to budget a $100,000 study for next year, and we'll still come in a year before any of our capital improvement programs or anything else are due.
Teresa, wasn't a review of using impact fees as an incentive one of the things that was included in the Economic Development Committee's kind of list of possibilities?
We're going to look at the use of incentives, the impact fees. However, Brad included the study because of the various departments that are affected through the impact fees, so that was looked at on a more global scale in the study. But as far as incentives that we can use for economic development, development of infill, those are all things that the committee can look at.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the council at this time? Oh, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Close.
My apologies, Mr. Wilkie. My brain is moving very slow this evening as I'm sick, so I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but I'm having difficulty putting this together. On page 3 of 10, the request for proposals and price estimate, the first sentence in the introduction states that the City of Lompoc is requesting proposal for qualified AB 1600 consultants to conduct a comprehensive update to the water and wastewater rate study.
I'll have to change that.
Okay, I thought I was going crazy for a second that this was not included in your report. So thank you. Just wanted to clarify that's a typo, a big typo. Thank you.
Are there any other questions before I open public comment? Okay. We're taking public comment now on just this item, and then we'll get to what most of you are here for. Is there anyone that wants to talk about AB 1600 impact fees? Seeing no one rise. Coming back. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, Brad, is that you think this would be something that we should put into the budget process for the next budget cycle, and that by then we'd have more of our ducks in a row?
Definitely. It would be, it seemed like last time it was done in a very methodical method. One thing I left out of this is that we created a housing in lieu fee at the same time. It would probably be a good idea at this point in time to possibly look at that, as well as the impact fees, as well as we also have waived right now the water retrofit fee, which was also implemented in the 2002-2003 period. So it would give us an ability to look at all these in a comprehensive manner. And what Councilmember Starbuck said, having an existing waiver suspension, not a waiver, but a suspension of the traffic fees, there's nothing to say that we can't have a justification for a waiver of any of these others. I wouldn't suggest any waiver of the water and wastewater fees because they support partially the bonds that we already have that exist from 2005 and 2007, but the other ones are potential. And we could do that before the 13-15 cycle.
Councilman Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess the approach here would be to wait until the budgetary cycle for a comprehensive study and spend the money on that. But in the meantime, leave the option open to suspend fees in a temporary basis for the purpose of economic development. Okay.
Correct.
Just clarifying. Thank you.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. On that same vein, yeah, I'm in no hurry to increase the impact fees. I think at this point, I think we're all on the same page that we're really looking at this as far as incentive packages is concerned for new development. However, I would really like that, if possible, if Mr. Wilkie would meet with the commissioners and explain that to them, give them these options, and then allow them to come back to us with that suggestion that they're going to, I'm sure they'll be bringing to us multiple suggestions, and that can be part of that package, starting on that level.
The commissioners on the new economic
development.
Sure.
Committee.
Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think it's just the study will be about increasing impact fees. It might potentially be about decreasing impact fees.
Absolutely.
And perhaps to redistribute them. And this is just a side comment, but I do know that the city of Santa Maria deals with their park impact fees in a different way than the city of Lompoc does. And what they have done is that they actually have put a component of those fees into the commercial to lessen the burden on the residential. Whether that's the right thing or not to do, I don't know. But the point is that there are different ways of doing this. And at one point in time, we do need to look at it, because the last time that it was looked at was 2003, which was, centuries ago as far as economy and everything else. So, it should be left wide open whether it's an increase in fees, decrease in fees, and how they should be actually allocated. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that that's really what the study would be about, correct?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think we need a formal action then. I think, City Administrator, do you have consensus that you're clear on?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, everybody comfortable with that? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brad. Okay. Before we go into meeting dates and things, I'd like to just get through the first little bit of the staff report. Then we spent quite a bit of time working on something to kind of give us some little broader thinking. So, Lucille, if you could go down to where we start talking about dates and just hold up a second, then we'll come back to that.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. The item before you is council discussion and direction regarding the schedule, topics, and format of the council's review process for the general plan update phase 1. And the recommendation is that the City Council consider the attached meeting schedule and provide direction on any changes. As an item of discussion, at the December 20th meeting, which I apologize for missing, the City Council agreed to begin review of the general plan update on January 24th and the 31st. And the Council indicated that the zoning consistency was of primary importance because it does affect the residents. And one of the items that staff was going to bring forward to the council in the general review of the the plan and the staff report as we were going to present it, was to consider removing the components of the zoning consistency that are causing a great deal of concern for the residents. And our suggestion would be that the zoning consistency where we have no issues of concern, there are a number of maps that the Planning Commission has recommended go forward, and those maps have to do with the community center, actually changing that to public facilities. There's some maps where it's a single parcel and the property owner, a couple of them are churches, they already have conditional use permit, so the zoning on it really doesn't impact their use, and the property owners have not indicated any concern. There are approximately 257 parcels that are residential type parcels that are concern for they were concerned at the Planning Commission and would obviously be a concern at the council level. Our suggestion would be that those parcels, as well as we heard that the council might want to provide us direction as far as another decision that was made regarding industrial properties, and if the council has some ideas about how those should be reviewed or re-reviewed, to provide that direction at the meeting of the 24th. I don't want to talk about meeting dates, but to send that back to the Planning Commission with a direction to think of perhaps some sort of solution that would not be kind of traditional. And I have spoken with a couple of the planning commissioners who are willing to take the task on. We have some ideas regarding how this might be done. And because the Planning Commission is a little bit less formal than the council is, because we could conduct some workshops that were more interactive, we might be able to come up with some solutions that we could bring to the council, and the council could then consider those independent of the general plan. This would allow us to go forward with the policy direction of the general plan, to look at the land use map as far as the expansion areas, which are obviously items that are going to cause a great deal of discussion and take the time of the council as well. And with kind of the separation of those, the council could focus on the policy decision, the language that's in the general plan, and determine whether to adopt it, accept the Planning Commission recommendation, or to make any changes. Once those, the land use and the circulation elements are adopted, we could then move into phase 2 and independently be working on the zoning consistency. So that's basically what is proposed at the beginning of the staff report, and I will stop at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I ask for the council's indulgence because I want to go down a little bit different road. And one of the things that I guess after you're the mayor a while, excuse me, you get a new perspective about a lot of things because of all the interactions that you have. So one of the things I want to try to do this evening is share just this much of my interactions over the last year with people who want to bring a project forward and talk about what I see are the problems and maybe take a little different look at what we're doing, because a general plan update is an opportunity to see where you are and where you want to go. And so my look is a little different than maybe you would traditionally think of in a general plan. So first, my first tenet of this is economic development is our number one objective, and bringing jobs to Lompoc is our number one objective. And, you know, my work week as mayor, not counting last month being sick, is about 60 hours, and fully half of that is spent talking to businesses and individuals about economic development and dealing with issues and trying to move them through the process. So in 20 minutes, I'm going to try to give you 1,500 hours of experience. So first I want to talk about some new realities. There are 3 big new realities in our life. The number one reality is since 1985, the profitability in many types of retail goods has dramatically diminished, and it has eliminated a whole lot of competition. And there's some there, and if you could, the rest are for the audience. And this is just some examples that I pulled from really long ago notes when I came to this town and opened a business. And the other reality that's come along now is the reality of the internet, and that's completely changed retail dynamics. So for instance, in the first sheet, it talks about locations selling tires in 1982. And before coming here to open a tire store, I guarantee you I looked at every one of them, again, who my competition were. And you'll note that back then there were 18 active sellers of tires in Lompoc that stocked and sold tires. And today there are 7. And a look at the towing companies of 1982, there were 8, and today there are 4. And a look at the auto parts stores of 1982, back then there were 6, and today there are 4. And a look at gas stations, and back then there were 18 that actively sold fuel, and today there are 11. And I just give you this information to kind of talk about what it is that has changed in retail, because that's my world. And what's changed is that the profitability of any retail item has diminished. In 1982, the profitability on a set of tires was 38%. So sold $1, you got 38 cents worth of profit. Today it's about 22 cents. So you have to sell an awful lot more, and the durability of the goods is different. So what's happened is that the dynamic of the retail world has changed, and the number of stores that you'll have selling similar products has decreased. The next reality is that in since past 2007, retailers are not expanding. And when they do expand, they're looking for the very most favorable demographics. It has to be right, or they're not interested in it. And they want a short window to make this come to fruition. They need a short period of time. And generally, one of the very first questions, and I see people in the audience smiling who've asked me these questions, is whether the proposed business is an entitled use, or whether it would be conditioned and have to go through the 3 to 18-month process to get a conditional use permit or an approved development plan. And I'm here to tell you today, no one wants to hear anything other than it's a conditioned use or it's an approved use. Pretty much if the answer is it's an entitled use, then there's a lot of enthusiasm and it goes forward. And if you start talking about conditional uses and development plans, the conversation comes to a really short end. So, who's got the clicker? Just for a second, I want to share with you some things about Lompoc. This is a tile that someone gave me, and I didn't know it, but the town of Lompoc was actually founded in 1874. So the city came a little later, but in between, in 1886, we have this map. This is the entire metropolis of Lompoc. And if any of you would like a copy, I think they cost $2 to print. Someone was kind enough to give it to me, and there's one in the council office. And you can't read it up in the corner, but we had 300 people living here. Our fire equipment was non-existent, and our water supply was poor. And I learned at a state park what these maps were for. This is how you got insurance. If you weren't on the map, you couldn't buy insurance. And that fire designation up there is what drove your fire rates. So this is 1886, and 2 years later in 1888, we formed a city. Not this city. And the reason most cities were formed back then was fire protection. And since we had bad water and no fire equipment, you could reasonably assume that might be what happened to us. So now we fast forward to 1941, and this is one of our very earliest zoning maps. And this was the initial step of, well, how are we going to segregate our community? Remember the other map we looked at from 1886 was pretty much anything was built anywhere. So this is the first direction. And you'll notice that there are 3 zones. There's manufacturing, which was 1 block along each side of the railroad tracks, except next to the grammar school. And then there was commercial, which was principally along Ocean and up H Street, and then there was residential. There was no R1, R2, R3. So that's the plan back then. It was pretty simple. Now, if we go forward one more map, and this one is, Joe, what year is that? It was 1959. And this is a map that zoned the entire valley all the way to Surf Beach. So at this point, Lompoc was going to go all the way to Surf. And in the very early 60s, there was actually a housing development started out on West Central in the general vicinity of Steve Jordan's artichoke lab called Marina. And they poured slabs and they hauled in wood. And then my understanding is the manned orbiting laboratory project ended, and they left their wood and went back to LA, and people built houses in town with it. And then going forward to the next map, this is the Lompoc zoning map today, and you can see that it's very different. It's much more compact, and we're not going out over the farm fields in all directions, and so that's where we find ourselves today. But the point of all this is that as time has changed and the economic realities have changed, we've changed what we thought were the things we needed to do. So what are the impacts of zoning districts and zoning ordinances, and how do they interact with economic development? Well, remember today's realities. We've eliminated many types of businesses by consolidation. We have the internet. We have the economic reality of the 2007 crash. And we need to avoid properties without the permitted use, or with permitted use rather than with going through an extensive planning process if we want to make something go forward. So now let me talk about some problems caused by our current fractured, I would say, zoning system, which was developed between 1941 and 1959 to approach zoning a little differently. And so my goal is to take you down a little trip down Ocean Avenue from east to west. And along these 2+ miles, we're going to find 2 industrial zones, 4 residential zones, and 6 commercial zones, and a planned residential overlay district that could be added in the future. And so you have an idea of what the level of complication is between all these zones. Now, I don't profess to be an expert, but this is the zoning ordinance of the city of Lompoc. And every time I get into it, I learn new things. So let's start out with a focus on the first parcels on Ocean Avenue are industrial, and there are 2 types of industrial parcels there. The first parcel on the south side of the road, right next to the Highway 246 bridge, is industrial, which has the minimum restrictions of the 2 parcels. By comparison, the wine ghetto on the other side of the highway is also industrially zoned and developed rather rapidly and became kind of our shining star of economic development. On the opposite side of the street of 12th Street is the former Grefco warehouse building, which when it came into the city was zoned business park, which required it under the code to be a planned industrial complex. So compare the wine ghetto's quick growth with what has happened to that project. Beginning in about 2005, Fess Parker entered negotiations to buy the property. Ultimately, Fess abandoned the idea because of uncertainties created by the Lompoc planning process, the unknown costs of mitigating some diesel oil that had been used to kill weeds. And although the city had RDA funds to mitigate blight, we didn't really choose to step in that particular process. In 2006, 3 developers with the property in escrow, they already had it in escrow, and a lease agreement with Terravant approached the city. They wanted to develop and reasoned that a 72,000 square foot existing building on the site would be quicker to develop than a new undeveloped site somewhere else in Lompoc or in the surrounding community. At the first meeting with the city, the developers were told the processing the development plan would take 16 to 18 months. At the end of that 16 to 18 months, the city could then tell the developers what improvements they would be mandated to provide and the costs. Now, would you choose to keep a building in escrow for 18 months or buy a property, make the monthly payments, spend about $50,000 on a development plan, and then find out what it would cost you? Now, obviously, they said no and went to Buellton. In Buellton, they met with the staff, received what turned out to be a very accurate cost estimate. They then went through the same environmental planning commission process as we have in Lompoc, except there it only took 4 months. In fact, the building that they built of approximately 100,000 square feet went through the planning process, was built, was operating in that same general 18-month time period that it would have taken in Lompoc to just get through the review process. In 2008, another group of winery investors who'd built other projects came to Lompoc to meet confidentially with the city staff. In the feasibility meeting, the city administrator, not the current one, the city administrator at the time, told them if they couldn't afford to hold the property for the 12 to 18 month process, they shouldn't start. That's literally what he said. That caused them great concern, but the leaking of all of the details of their project into the community almost immediately basically caused them to go build it in Santa Maria. Along the way, what I would kind of describe as a pie-in-the-sky development plan was ultimately approved for the project, but the city failed to advise the developer to divide the project into phases. Thus, after 2 years of work and untold money, review, and cost, the only thing that could be done was to build the whole project as approved at one time or nothing. Nothing happened. In October of 2010, a group of investors headed by Steve Zodovich put the property in escrow again. Several problems arose immediately. First, the city staff said even putting in more power for chillers for the existing warehouse would trigger a full review. Second, although a development plan had been approved, the one I alluded to earlier, the city had not resolved issues with 2 active water wells on the site. Third, the current property owner had not obtained an environmental clean closure letter because somewhere along the way somebody dumped some drain oil on the north side of the building on the ground. And fourth, no wine production could be done in the building. This interpretation by staff came from requests by the developer who got the development plan approved to reduce his parking number to allow only 9,000 square feet of production, but then the decision was that we really couldn't allow the production because that was different from the warehousing, and therefore you had to go through a process. And that escrow ended. By July of 2011, the city had reached an agreement and capped the wells. The clean closure letter was coming, and Councilmember Lingle and I had kept up a dialogue with the Zodoviches, and the city staff seemed more accommodating. And in September, after a letter spearheaded by our city administrator that solved about $100,000 worth of issues for the developer and didn't cost the city anything, escrow closed. Now, although both the developer and I thought after one of our first meetings that the 9,000 square feet of production was entitled, planning staff didn't quite agree. And the stretch of this issue lasted up until December 27th, when finally, with the help of an outside consultant that the city administrator acquired for us, we reached a resolution to allow the project to go forward in the interim basis while the all-in-one, take-it-or-leave-it development plan was worked on. So here's the comparison for my long-winded explanation. Sorry about that. You have a wine ghetto where no development plans are required, that's expanded and jobs have grown. It's been very exciting. And we have a business park where we have a set of restrictions that cause things to take longer. And instead of taking a matter of months to develop something, we've been thrashing around on it for 5 years. Okay, now let's take a look at the parcel across the street from Home Depot. This is zoned commercial office, CO. So here are the uses that are allowed for commercial office. Let's see if you can visualize any of those there, realizing that we have hundreds of vacant offices in Lompoc and have had for as long as I've lived here, since 1982. So you could have an art studio, you could have a business professional office, you can build a hospital, we could have insurance sales, we could have a medical or dental office, we could have a music school, a nursery school, a nursing home, a parking lot, a photographic studio, a public utility office, a rest home, and a restaurant without the sale of alcohol, or with a conditional use, the sale of alcohol, and a conditional use, a church, or conditional use, multifamily housing. Twice in the time that I've lived here, someone has brought in a development plan for that parcel for multifamily housing. Twice it's been turned down. And I don't disagree. It's a very premier piece of property in our community, and I'm not sure we want to build condos on it. But given that set of possible tenants, would you build something there? Probably not. 7th Street to A Street. This area is primarily PCD, planned commercial development. PCD is your basic C2 uses with the Mother May I clause. If it's vacant and you wish to build, or if it's built and you want to change uses, then you have to get approval. 17040 of our code, 048 of our code says, following the adoption of a preliminary development plan, said plan shall not be substantially changed, amended, altered, or modified in any manner without first being reviewed by the Community Development Department. What does that mean to a business coming in? So let's take another example. Let's talk about Pacific Coast RV. They wanted to park and sell trailers and RVs on the vacant former motorcycle dealership lot, long ago Clark and Larson Volkswagen. And they were a new business that did not compete with any existing business. In an economic development world, that's very important. Happily, the city administrator and I met with the owner on his first visit to City Hall, and he was impressed with our friendly city and our friendly city staff. And in a matter of weeks, he was open and generating sales tax for us. A happy ending. Not quite. After Pacific Coast RV moved in, they wanted to install the propane tank they had talked about when they came to us in the beginning, and they wanted to park trailers on the entire lot. Now, planning interpreted that this was that change of use, as the prior operators of the site had not sold propane and had not parked on all of the property. Hence, a CUP, at least a staff review, and permits and fees were due. Now, this is after he'd already moved in, and we welcomed him and told him he was here. I discussed these issues at length with the city administrator, who talked with staff, and ultimately, planning decided a CUP was not necessary. I suspect in a prior day before this city administrator and this council, that would not have been the end. And if you ask me today if that was a requirement and if we sidestepped it, I guess you could read it either way, and that's part of the problem. From A to F, the zoning begins with planned commercial development, then commercial office, and finally one block of C2. C2 is kind of where you can do almost anything. It's that original one from 1941. And this is the last block in Lompoc where there's any C2, the least restrictive use. One of the things in planning is you can't have islands of zoning. So the question that's always bothered me is how we were able to keep this little one block section of C2, and yet in other places where we wanted to keep something else, we positively couldn't because you can't have islands. Behind the Ocean Avenue frontage from these lots on both sides of the street is the mixed-use zone. This is a new zone created in, I think, 2007 to promote the idea of a compact urban form and have residential space above retail space. So how have we done with that since 2007? To date, not a single building in these 9 city blocks, and when I say 9 city blocks, I mean a whole block, 2 half blocks, has been built or remodeled since the ordinance was passed. And here's the reason why. The allowed residential component of 3 apartments per 7,500 square foot floor is too limited to be economically viable. Anybody out there renting any 1,000 square foot apartments? There's no demand, nor has there been in the last 30 years, for the second floor commercial office space, which is the other use. And shared off-site parking, which could be used under the general plan, can't be used under the zoning ordinance, so everything has to be on site. And because the minimum parcel size in the ordinance is 75 feet, even though most of the lots in the zone are 50 feet, that means another set of conditions and requirements. What are the consequences? An existing 6,000 square feet, what are the consequences to the existing buildings? So there's an existing 6,000 square foot furniture store, King's Furniture, many of you know Mrs. King, which prior to being rezoned from mixed use was evaluated at $1.3 million, is currently for sales for $600,000, and there are no takers because it has no uses. An existing automotive business, which has a pre-existing non-conforming use, so it could continue to operate as unsellable because nobody wants to buy a mixed use with pre-existing non-conforming uses. 2 property owners, happy to retire, with willing buyers, can't sell because of the inability to get loans or the reticence of buyers because of the pre-existing non-conforming use. And I think a couple of those people are here tonight. So, F Street to J Street, Old Town Commercial. Toyota of Lompoc, which is also a pre-existing non-conforming use, and Plum Perfect Plumbing. Let's talk about Plum Perfect Plumbing. When Plum Perfect bought the building, they wanted, and that's at F and Ocean. They wanted to add on to the building and put a new facade on the old gas station. Unfortunately, facade requirements in the Old Town Ordinance made that financially impossible. Now, to their credit, I think they've done a beautiful job of taking an old gas station and making it look really good, including the bathtub. So how has the Old Town Commercial worked out for us? The Old Town Commercial and its restrictions is an obvious failure. Since the restrictions were adopted in 1982, 1 new building has been built, the dance studio. And I wrote 2 had been torn down, but I've been corrected. 3 buildings have been torn down. And 2 buildings have had a facelift. How has it been economically? In 1985, downtown rent was about 75 cents a square foot. That would be about $1.10 today adjusted for inflation. Today, downtown rent is 45 cents a square foot. So basically, the property owners have lost half their value because of the restrictions placed on the property. And how does it look? Well, it's just kind of slowly weathered away, but it has a really nice new clock. Okay, here's another good example. At I and Ocean is an old gas station, and there was a list of them I gave to you, that might make a nice office, but offices are not permitted on the ground floor in Old Town. And yes, the gas company office on South H Street is a pre-existing non-conforming use. So if it ever closed, there couldn't be an office there either. Additionally, most of the uses that revitalize downtowns elsewhere are either prohibited or conditional. Residential density that sustains downtown businesses is not allowed. And the answer is pretty simple. If we've been there 30 years and we've torn down 3 buildings and built 1, it ain't working. Appreciate your patience. I'll get to the end of this in about 8 more pages. I don't have that much voice. K to N Street, South Side, K to L Street, North Side, Convenience Center. This zone could be described as C2 light. The parcel of interest is the old Texaco station at M and Ocean. Some of you remember when it was a Texaco station. And most recently, L&L Motors, now William Nolan Used Cars. Mr. Nolan purchased the property with the idea of building a showroom on the lot to sell his classic cars, which he currently stores in buildings he owns at the Lompoc Airport. Now, had he asked me, I would have told him not to buy the lot, because I know that that can't be done. But he didn't understand that he couldn't improve his property. So, I'm sorry, that's a prohibited use. Now, you can keep using exactly what you have and sell cars and keep the old gas station, but you can't build a nice, shiny new showroom. Then he said, well, what else can I build there? I've got some money and I want to build something. So he took a look at the list of permitted uses. Sure enough, there was not a single business on there that was viable in this economy. How about the conditional use of a service station? Because that's a conditional use. No, a service station can't do the types of automotive uses that would pay the rent today, because a service station is associated with a certain group of automotive services, not what works today. So we have a property owner with money who wants to build, who owns the property, and there's nothing he can do. The rest of West Ocean is PCD and community convenience and various residential zones. So let me recap the problems. Because most of our properties are built out, matching a user to a property is not very easy, and it's made doubly difficult by zoning restrictions. Most of the former small business uses in the code no longer exist or have been consolidated for a far smaller number of merchants. Businesses are unwilling to go through a conditional use project for projects that are not new construction or major exterior remodels because of the time and uncertainty. And I'm talking small businesses, which is the bulk of what we have here. There's a proposed residential overlay that creates more conditions and more uses and would theoretically allow a whole lot of properties to become mixed use, except we haven't been successful with our last 2 efforts at that. So simply stated, the 1976 system just simply doesn't work. We're wasting our time. There's a discussion about sending some of this back to the Planning Commission. I don't know if there's anybody out here tonight, but there are people with those downzone properties that have been to 12 meetings without resolution. There's a discussion that only a certain percentage of them have filed objections, but that doesn't count the ones that filed 6 years ago, because those are already long thrown away. So I don't believe in sending this issue back to the Planning Commission. I don't believe in sending any part of this back to the Planning Commission. I think the buck stops here, and the 5 of us all got elected to fix the problems. And I think we're all smart enough, and we have a staff that's smart enough to help us fix those problems. And here's the reason I don't think we should send anything back. We sat here about a year ago now, and we said, hey, there's a sign ordinance that's been laying around since 2005, and we'd like the Planning Commission to take an action and get it through their agenda and bring it to us. And it hasn't happened. Each member of this council has a planning commission that they trust and they appointed and they can talk to. So what do I see as a possible solution? Well, you can tell that I've spent a lot of time sitting thinking about this, particularly since I was sick in bed for 3 weeks and that was all I could do. And I think our solution is we need something closer to 1941 than we do to 1976, surely, than we do to our current ordinance. We need to eliminate all of these multiplicity of zones and get a zoning ordinance that makes it simple to get things done, but protects the public from the things that we perceive to be bad. Now, some of those perceptions are gone. No one is going to build a lead smelter in Lompoc in the industrial zone. It simply isn't going to happen. Changes in environmental ordinances and have solved many of these problems. So what's a possibility? Well, I guess my shining star out there is the C2 ordinance. And we could, with a little work, we could make the C2 ordinance cover most of our commercial area. And some of the things we would want to consider in that C2 ordinance would be including auto repair in it. Now, auto repair is not allowed. And I always thought that was a good idea. You know, I ran an auto shop and they're greasy and they're noisy and all of that. But you know, that's not today's reality. Today's reality is auto repair facilities replace electronic components and they don't change engines, they don't change transmissions, because by the time those wear out, largely the car is a pile of rust over in the corner. And I was in Atascadero about 9 months ago, and there was a brand new, beautiful automotive service facility smack in the middle of a downtown shopping center. I thought, what are they doing putting that there? And then I drove up and looked at it and went, wow, this is really nice. And I remembered when I was up on 8th Street and people would say, I'm coming to you because I can have my car worked on while I go shopping, versus going to my friend over on Laurel, where somebody has to give you a ride to somewhere and burn more greenhouse gas and go down that road. And then I think we need to make the ordinance so that it covers existing facilities one way and new construction or modification another. Because I wouldn't want a really ugly facade put on a building in the middle of downtown. So changing a facade on a building is something that would require that conditional use permit through the Planning Commission. And expanding the footprint of a building beyond some minimal amount that allows people to do what they need to do is something that needs to go through a Planning Commission because it impacts traffic and parking and all those things. But to require someone to go through this process simply because the use of the building is being changed, it doesn't work anymore. Finally, one of the things that occurs in all of our zones, and I was talking to Larry Warner earlier today, and he was talking about his building, which was a 106-year-old industrial building, and then the residential neighborhood grew up next to him. Well, we have those inconsistencies everywhere. But our ordinance doesn't give anybody any security. You know, there's a house on E Street, and a prior council had to go through an entire hearing process so the guy could get his utilities turned back on because it hadn't been occupied, and therefore his utilities couldn't be turned back on because the house was no longer a permitted use. And the council, of course, turned the utilities back on. We need to fix that. This is silly. If you have an existing structure and it's permitted, whether it's a current use or not, you need to be able to occupy it. And if it goes vacant, you can leave it vacant, and when you want to occupy it again, you can occupy it. Here's another issue. This one really fires me up, personally and cumulatively. Non-permitted uses. And there'll be somebody here tonight to talk about this. Basically, the city policy is today, if you have a structure and you don't have a copy of the building permit and the city can't find a copy of the building permit, your structure doesn't exist. So I want to share a couple realities that people have talked to me about because I've been asking questions. Number one, prior to 1900, people weren't really very good about getting building permits, probably up into the 20s. Yeah, you know, some did, some didn't. In the 40s, a lot of second units were built because Vandenberg Camp Cook was full of people with nowhere to live. Garages were converted, little rooms were built, a lot of things happened. And it was a war effort, and not everybody got a building permit. And then in the early 70s, a lot of garage conversions occurred, and the city kind of said, yeah, it's okay, as long as you have a place to park, but you don't necessarily have to have a carport. And then that kind of got off into, well, you know, maybe not so much. And then there's the issue of city records. And I'm going to give you two examples. One was here in this council chamber when a lady stood up, and I didn't write her name down, and I think Councilmember Martin remembers it. And she said, you know, the city said I had this second unit, and it was built without a permit, and I couldn't rent it out anymore because the utilities were turned off because it had been vacant for a while. And she went home, and her father had built the house, and he built the second unit. And she started rummaging through his papers, and she found the 1920 something building permit, and came into the front counter and said, okay, turn my utilities back on now. Now, what are the odds of that document still being in existence, except in that rather large warehouse over on E Street? And then I'll share my personal story. In 2001, we opened a building at the east end, or business in the east end of our building across from Moore Mill and Lumber when I bought the building, and it had been occupied by others, and my manager got into the proverbial irritation contest with a city staff member because he had some chairs outside, and by the time I got in the middle of it, I got a letter that said, you have 4 days to close your business because you guys put all these changes into this building, and you didn't get a permit. And I was going to pull a copy of the letter and bring it, but I didn't have time. I still have it. And I went, what are you talking about? You know, I bought this building. This is the way it was. Well, you have to come up with a permit, Mr. Leonard. You have to close. I said, but Comcast built this. This was the Comcast studio. They wouldn't build without a permit. We have no record of the permit. You're going to have to close and get permits and get it all modified and get it permitted, and then you can reopen. And then I remembered something that I'd seen in the building, an electrical panel. And guess what? Inside the electrical panel was a sticker from the city of Lompoc from 1964 stating that it had been signed off on the building permit. And the whole problem went away just like that. So there are a whole lot of people out there who have things like that. And we need to get a stand on that. And I don't know what the answer is. You know, I started talking to people about it. And one guy, I said, well, you know, if it's been there 20 years and you've been paying property taxes on it 20 years and it's a safe dwelling, then as far as I'm concerned, it exists. And somebody else said, well, you know, no, you know, we had pretty good city records starting in 86, but I won't swear to it because that's when we were automated. So, you know, if it was built after 1986 and there's no permit on file, there's probably no permit. And this is just, I can't imagine how many hours we have spent trying to solve this issue with garage conversions and non-conforming structures. And you remember the story of the lady who got the house built and then couldn't use the kitchen? Yeah, you remember that one? You remember that one, Bob. I guess, you know, sometimes we all argue. We do. And maybe get emotional. But I'm so proud of the fact that at the end of the day, all of us together come up with an answer that makes sense and solves the problem. All right. No tattling on me now. And I think we can take this on and we can fix it. And I think the next step needs to be a meeting after all of us talk to our planning commissioner and talk to the people that we trust in the community and listen to everybody that's out here tonight. We say, you know what? We need to take a different look at this. What are we going to do What's our legacy for the next 20 years for the community? Is our legacy going to be something like Grefco that's gone on for 5 years and we're just now pouring cement? Thank you guys, 600 grand worth of work. Is our legacy going to be the industrial park on Central Avenue that's BP, which I think put on the map in 1976, but at least back then, that we have built a grand total of 4 buildings on, while Buellton has built, 5 industrial parks and Santa Maria has built 100? Or is our legacy going to be that we eliminated red tape, but we provided the protection so that the community didn't end up with a purple building with green stripes that looked like heck at the corner of H and Ocean? Isn't that what we're here for, to keep the community, the essence of our community? And that's more than I've said in the whole time I've been up here, so you know how excited I am about it. So here's what I see as our objectives. Number 1, we need a simplified commercial zone because of the realities I've talked about. Number 2, we need a consolidated single industrial zone that's simplified. Number 3, a lot of parcels, which were industrial parcels, were downzoned by the prior council. And they include such things as Larry Warner's building, which is across the street from an industrial zone. And they include the fuel station next to the city yard. And they include about 25,000 square feet of industrial buildings between N and No on the south side of, or the north side of Laurel. And we need to unwind that and give those people back their use and get those buildings occupied and get businesses in there. And then we need to take on the annexations in a sensible way and take on the ones to the north and the east that are on this side of the river and deal with those. And then we need to take a meeting and we need to talk about the issue of crossing the river and the value, the positive, the negatives of doing it, and just be done with it. And then we need to take on the west and the south annexations. And then we need to give people back their property rights for the residential downzoning. The concept has been, okay, we're going to send you a card, and if you come and object 11 times, we won't downzone your property. But if you don't come 11 times, we're going to go ahead and do it. No, that's not right. The concept is, would you like to have your property downzoned? Do you feel like you would like to have your property downzoned? If you would, tell us, and we'll be happy to do that for you. But you have to ask for it. It's to Lucille's point earlier. You know, there are properties that are willing to be rezoned. Lord knows my wife would like to have her parkland converted to something, and I won't be voting on it. You know, but let's take it on and fix it and quit kicking the can down the road. We fixed so many things, and I get so many. There were 3 positive comments on the mayor's phone thanking this council, 2 for fixing graffiti and the great paint out program, and 1 because of the clock and the fact that the barrels and things are in downtown are better. And everybody perceives that things are getting better because they are. Let's fix this. Okay, thank you for your indulgence. And who wants to be first? Councilmember Langley.
Just a quick comment and assumption that you're not going to make this into a economic development promote Lompoc video?
I could, because now we have Tom sitting out here with a success story. We fixed it. We finally fixed one thing, just one. Let's fix some more. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
Yeah, and it was just a joke, naturally.
Yeah, I know how you are.
Actually, I appreciate the history lesson. I mean, it's, quite lengthy. And you're right, I'm also proud of this council. We have solved a lot of problems that have been existing for a while. I'm not sure what the answer to this is either. I mean, you've brought up some points that, I'm sure other people are as surprised as I am that all these things existed. So I'd love to take it on and see what we can do. But I don't know where to start. So, we have to do it as a council, not individually, though.
Well, I'd like to take just a second for all of us to comment, and then there's a bunch of people here who came to talk about some of these same issues, because I told them, here's your chance, come and say your piece. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know that you and I don't agree in a lot of things, but on this one we do. And the reason why that is because I do think that the lack of planning, because this really reflects a lack of planning. Things were just left to the wind, and red tape built on red tape, and it built on more red tape, and 18 years later we have a bunch of residents that are struggling with being out of compliance and in the wrong zoning part of town and with the wrong zone here and there. But, you know, the responsibility is really on the city. It is really on the city. So we have a big issue, and the issue is that we need to revise our zoning in such a way that is simplified, it is consistent, and it is for the benefit of the community, not just your tire store. Okay, I mean, I'm sorry, because a lot of your examples is about cars and tires and gas stations. I mean, there's a lot of other things out there besides gas stations, tire stores, and mechanics. I mean, right? You know, there is a bigger world out there, so it needs to be consistent for everybody.
Yes.
So the problem is, you know, we had a single-purpose committee that made some recommendations, never touched this. Why? Because this is complex, it requires experts, it requires studies. You know, that's where the responsibility has to go in the experts, and demand that those experts fix it. And who are the experts? It's our planning department. They have to fix it. I mean, you know, they get paid for it.
Thank you. And just so you know, the only reason I talked about all the automotive was, you know, talk about what you know. And I actually had some stuff from 1982. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Fabulous monologue. I want you to repeat it. No, I'm joking. I'm glad you brought up a few examples that I've had on the back of my brain for a while. Number one is Mr. Nolan's property that he just purchased on Ocean Avenue. Now, I went and spoke with him, and I looked at some of his fabulous vehicles, and he explained the same issue that he explained with you, with me. And in my logical brain, I'm thinking, why is there no way to get around this? As you mentioned, he wouldn't even need to pull out loans to build something beautiful on this property. He has great taste, and so I know that it would suit well for our downtown corridor. So why couldn't we get around this? And I'm really glad that we discussed this and we're looking at this in a more general sense. The other thing has to do with residential properties. So I agree, and I've spoken with some community members about this, that grandfather clause issue, where if it goes vacant, then all of a sudden it's non-conforming. Vacant, I think it's like 6 months, isn't it? Something very short. And so that definitely was something I wanted to address. I'm glad that you took even a step further and you really want to take a general look at this, because I think it's worth it. Now, I do think that I don't want to become an anything goes community. There's still regulations that we need to follow. We can't spot zone. We just can't. I think by the law we cannot spot zone. So there's going to be some hurdles in this process, but I think that this is a good start. So I'd like to hear what the community has to say. Thank you.
Okay, it's up to you guys out in the audience. It's come on down time. Tom, you're first, because you sat closest to the microphone.
Well, look, Tom Davidson, I happen to represent Zodovich and doing this development out in the east end of town. And one thing I will say is that through the efforts of you people and the staff here, there is a different sense than I felt 5-6 years ago when we tried to bring a project through here. So people are trying, and part of it's just the attitude and how do we go about things. So are we here to try and figure out how to make a project work, or are we here to worry about how all these rules work? I'm not sure that I agree with you that staff can fix this. Sometimes when you're in the thick of the forest, maybe it's hard to look at solutions. And I don't know that I have the best answers. You've hired a group of people or appointed a bunch of commissioners, and maybe some of those folks can come up with some ideas. But one of the thoughts is maybe to go look at surrounding communities that have developed and look at how those zoning ordinances work and how their processes work. Obviously, we have to live within CEQA and some of the state mandates, but things seem to work smoother in some communities than others. And I'm really, really happy to see you guys take this on, because I think it's good for the city, and hopefully we can clean up the entrance to town and be a great example for people to come.
Thank you. Okay, come on down. Don't be bashful. If you're sitting out there and you don't come and talk, you can't go home.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, Nick Gonzalez. I own property in the Old Town. I tried to bring a business in the Old Town. Ironically, as I sat and listened to Mayor Lynn, I have a property where the county assessed me taxes, but it was a non-conforming use that hadn't been used that I couldn't use. So you pay taxes on something, you can't use it. If you do, you got to bring it up. Conditional use permit. We've on the Planning Commission level, they've addressed some of the issues with the conditional use permit with the zoning administrator's ability to do that, but still the process can be costly. I had a property that goes back that I was inherited from my parents. This was how I got involved with city government as a whole was about 12 years ago. I was told that an addition didn't exist. Well, when the dust settled, it turned out that the property, in fact, was built with, I believe, not redevelopment, but special funds from the city and was administered by the city. So, all the things that you explained do happen. I think in whatever endeavor you take on, simplicity, 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 with the protection of the community. Doesn't have to be complex, make it simple. And it does have an impact. My wife and I both have businesses here. We tried to locate in the downtown, and we're unsuccessful initially. With some perseverance and with working with staff, I was able to bring my office into the Old Town because it fell within one of the uses. But there's a lot of other office type uses I know for specifically for the Old Town that would be beneficial to the Old Town that couldn't because they don't fall within those strict definitions. So there are definitely things that we can do to simplify and make the process of economic development and of infill much easier. I have to agree from a standpoint from lending, which is my personal profession, that I've witnessed the slow and steady decline of property values as a direct result of a decrease in prices of rental rates. An income-producing property's value is based upon the income it generates, and when the income it generates falls, so does the value. And that occurs when it becomes too costly to capture. It's almost a circular equation. You have diminishing rental rates. You have a property that, if you're going to meet the new requirements, costs substantial amounts of money to rehabilitate or to meet the new code or to meet the new zoning requirements. And so you get to a point where it's not cost effective to do that. So we need to do something if we're going to ever revitalize downtown. The current rental rates are not going to justify reinvestment into the downtown unless it becomes easier to do so. So again, I encourage you to make things as simplistic as possible. But please, I would agree with Councilwoman Acosta that I don't want to be a free-for-all city, but I'd like to see a lot more flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, staff, my name is Robert Schmidtke. I've lived here now about 6 years. I did live in South Redondo Beach. I sold my place in South Redondo and reinvested. I owned a 4-unit there with an owner's unit in the front and 3 in the back. I now own a home over on Cypress, about the 1200 block there, and a 3-unit building. It's a duplex in the front with a house built in 1939 or so in the back, all permitted. I found the permits at the county level, not at the city level. I was looking quite a while for rental property so I could make a living. As the economy, the crash, I was into other investments in other states, and I got to tell you, I'm bleeding. I then found out recently they're going to downzone 2 city blocks, just right there, and guess where my new property is? They want to take my R3 and turn it into an R2. Now, right now, it's not worth as much as I paid for it. If they do that, it'll be worth half as much for the obvious reasons that the mayor outlined. It's almost like a taking. And this is residential. It is fully rented right now and in better shape than it's been in the last 10 years because that's the way I run rental properties. That's where I made my money, with rental properties in Harbor City. I got worn out there because I had to beat the looky-loos down and wash the lines out where they drew them around the bodies. It was a rough area. I had one building where they were throwing them out the windows and not opening the windows. And that got expensive, and I just evicted the building. That doesn't happen here in Lompoc. Well, maybe it does, but not in my buildings. I have families there, you know, and it's quiet. It's well maintained. If anything goes wrong, I use Wiser Management to run the place, but if anything goes wrong, they call me, and I see that it's done right away. I can't afford to have that building, that property downzoned to R2, nor probably can most of the other people that own rental properties in that area. Mine's in the 500 block. It would preclude even more density in the area. I mean, well, no, if they went to R2, you could build a grandma house out back. But my 3-unit would be legal non-conforming. No loans. Who's going to buy it? It just, you want to buy it before they do this? This can't be, please. I mean, it's going to happen to a lot of other people. I look at the map, and the map, just looking from my place west, that whole area from like College, what's the next street up, south of there? Yeah. Is all like R3. All the lots are the same size. They're all residential. Not all of them are built out, but a good many of them are. Why anybody would pick this chunk and downzone it is past my understanding. I asked about it at the counter, and they told me I should have known. When I bought it, I only bought it first of the year. I wasn't aware of that. Nobody made me aware. It was a repo. And nobody from FHA made me aware of that. And my real estate person didn't either. But I know there's a lot of other people in the same boat. And we just cannot do this sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on, you guys.
Evening, Mayor, members of the council, Ralph Harmon. I agree with the mayor on some things. I disagree with you on other things. And some of the things you said, I think there's some fallacy to them. But in the big picture, I would agree with you more than disagree. But one of the things I will agree with you is that it needs to stay here, not go back to the Planning Commission. To keep sending it back. When I was on the Planning Commission, we went through one of these ping-pong issues. It came back to us. We couldn't do anything. It went back to City Council. City Council said send it back to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission got it. We couldn't do anything. Sent it back. This went on 4 times. It's just ridiculous. It's now in your ballpark. Keep it there. Solve the problem. Start listening to the people that are in these download things. I happen to represent one of the owners when they were on vacation, or they had a family illness, went on a real vacation at the Planning Commission level. We got nowhere. We submitted a letter the next time because we couldn't be there. And anyway, it's still sitting there someplace. So those things are going on, and I know what that gentleman was talking about. because I'm intimately involved with this other piece of property. So, however, I came here tonight thinking we were going to get a date, and so we would know when this process was going to take place. Particularly,
we're going to talk about that a little further down in the meeting.
At 11 o'clock or earlier?
We'll see how we go.
All right. I may have to leave before then. Anyhow, that's one of the things. I hope that the council will set some dates so that the public knows that, okay, is it going to be the 24th, is it going to be February, whatever, that we're going to talk about that's the downzoning, that thing. We're going to get to the boundary on the west side of town, the Bailey Avenue corridor. If we're going to go back to that again, then can we know tonight when the date's going to be that that's going to be discussed? Or are we going to just have this thing trail on for months and months? So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, my name is Maria Ginninga. I'm a business owner as well as a resident of Lompoc. This issue has gone back and forth. My suggestion is to revert zoning back to pre-1997 and amend general plan to zoning until the general plan ordinance can be amended. This step was taken when the industrial and commercial parcels were brought. This is how we found out that there was something wrong with their zoning. Actually, the business owners came. I was sitting in this room. They basically came before city council and said, hey, you're affecting our business, property rights, values, and I may stand corrected, but I believe that city council at that point decided to leave everything the same. I'm asking the same to be done. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me just say one thing. There were two issues. One issue was a rework of the zoning for industrial to make every use a conditional use, and that went away. And then the other one was those industrial properties that were downzoned, and that did in fact happen. So most people were saved, and a few people went under the bus.
And the same thing's happening with 600 plus parcels of residential. And all I'm asking is for 14 years, actually we found out about this, like 3-4 years ago. So for 12 years, I'm a real estate broker here in town. We've been selling properties. The city has been telling people the wrong information, and I think it would just be to everybody's best interest to go back to pre-1997 and give the community of Lompoc the opportunity to amend the general plan or make the adequate changes now that we're talking about simplifying things. And I agreed. My husband and I, for 8 years, I was a home-based business because every time I chose a location, I could not have an office there. And it just became very frustrating. One day I talked to Keith in the planning department. I said, why does Los Olivos, Los Alamos, Solvang, Buellton, you go and they have real estate offices in their downtown areas? When people come visit a city, they want to know what are property values like. Maybe we'd like to buy a second home here. Well, in the old downtown area, we're not allowed to have a real estate office downstairs. So, and his suggestion was bring it before city council and see maybe they'll look into it. So I am asking to please look into that. Let's look at surrounding communities, what's making them, Solvang, they're only 20 minutes away from us, and they're booming with tourists. And I believe Lompoc has a lot more things to offer. We have a mission, we have a beach, we have Vandenberg, we have murals, so much to offer. And I just hope that our city council does take into account that simplifying ordinances to make us business owners who will have a vested interest in our community continue to do business in this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor and council members. My name is Eric Hancock, resident and business owner here in the city of Lompoc. I have to agree that zoning is broken in our city with its inability for anybody to really do anything. But it's worse than that. I purchased a property in 2000 2006 with the intent of building a building for my business. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk. The zoning was right, the business was right, the building was right. It matched every other building that went up around it in the last few years before that. It's an engineered building, slam dunk. I got a loan, got the property, going to put the building up.
Describe engineered building, because I know what it is and you know what it is.
It's on the 300 block of North G Street, and it's a steel engineered building, and be for a contracting business. Like I said, I thought it was a slam dunk. I borrowed enough money to build it and maintain it until occupancy, in which time I was going to get a loan against it as a built building. Construction loans are really tough. So anyway, I go in and everything's right. There should be no reason. I go, and I was being pessimistic. I go, oh, so this should probably take 6 months or so, huh? And the people I was talking to at the building department, planning department, they just they rolled their eyes and smirked, and I didn't take it as a sign of, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I just, oh, okay, friendly people. So we get to going, and I can tell you months and months go by. You get drawings built. The building itself had engineered plans. You purchase that with the building, and they're by state licensed engineering architect, and so you have to get plans drawn for the interior and the landscaping and parking and everything. So I went to a local designer here in town. He drew them up. He works within the city all the time. So we present those. There's always a reason why they come back. The plant, we don't like the plants he designed. Okay, why don't you just cross out what's specified there, put on there what's acceptable? No, that isn't the way it works. You've got to have them redrawn and then submit them again. Well, number one, redrawing the plan, $650. Number two, 3 months again waiting for them to go through the process of being approved. Nobody wants to sign anything off down here. They're scared there's going to be a mistake and they don't want to be held accountable. That's my opinion. I don't know why it would take that long if it wasn't. Back and forth, back and forth. Another instance, I had to come to a planning commission. They wanted me to put an automatic electric gate on the driveway going into the parking lot. The building was on the front of the property, parking in the rear. And I asked, why? Well, that needs to be open during business hours. Okay, I'm a businessman. I want to be open during business hours. I want my customers to be able to get to me. That's a no-brainer. No, we want the gate closed so you can't see your rubble you're going to have back there, as you drive by. I go, who says I'm going to have rubble back there? Oh, you might have a container back there. You might have scrap. You might have this. I might, whatever. You know how much those gates cost? Then I approached him. There is no public sewer line going down G Street. So there's one that goes between properties out to F Street between Dixon Engineering and what is now MTCO Construction. And I'm going to put in a lift station or a pressurized sewer line and tie into that. You can't do that. And I go, Unified Plumbing Code says I can. If I'm more than 200 feet away from a public sewer, then I can put in a private system and or put in a lift station / pressurized system. Their response was, no, you can't do that. And I go, the code says I can. And I go, why can't I? He said, I don't like it. I said, I didn't ask you if you liked it. Why can't I do it? And he says, I won't allow it. That's an approved building on an approved lot with an approved use, and you still can't get it done. So, I don't know, something's broke. It needs to be fixed.
Is that still going on? When
No, my hands are up here like this. There's nothing going on.
So when did that take place? I mean,
that started. I bought the property in October 2006. Finally had plans stamped, approved June 26, but in 2008. But I wasn't notified until after the first of the year 2009, and they said, "You better get down here and pay your fees, or your plans are going to expire." I go, "When did they get approved?" June 26, 2008. Bring your $17,000 now. We won't do anything with the property. Let weeds grow on it now. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Good evening. My name is Randy Miller, and for the past several months, the City Lompoc Building and Planning Divisions have been trying to force my wife and I to convert an existing guest house on our south side property to storage use. Their rationale is that they are unable to find a building permit. According to the County of Santa Barbara, this guest house was built in 1950. The county maintains separate building and appraisal records for it and refer to it as a well-kept studio apartment. They identify it with a different address than the main house, as does the U.S. Postal Service. The county tax assessor classifies the property as residential rentals, not single-family residence. Even the city prosecutor says we may apply for permits to bring the guest house into compliance with existing code. Despite this, the staff at Building and Planning has arrogantly and steadfastly demanded that we demolish the guest house or convert it to storage and remove all of the fixtures and the utilities, including water, sewer, gas, phone, and cable. In spite of their own admission that it is very possible there are records missing from 60 years ago. They have not yet offered any official explanation of how they made this determination, nor cite any specific code that justifies it. They seem to be making up the policy on the spot. So, as we continue to contest this decision, we would like you to consider the three following questions. Are we not entitled to an official explanation of how their decision was made, supported by the Lompoc Municipal Code and known facts, not attitude and conjuncture? When an inconsistency or contradiction in the record arises, ought not the benefit of the doubt go to the citizen? Or should the city staff even have an opinion or position unless it's backed up by the code? If it is decided that Building and Planning's decision prevails, shouldn't enforcement action be applied to all of the properties in Lompoc with similar code violations? Complaint-driven code enforcement may save staff time, but it is unfair and may be unconstitutional. It pits neighbor against neighbor and invites lawsuits. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Council, staff, Mr. Mayor, I'm the aforementioned Larry Werner, who is in I own a building that's, I work out of it. I'm a contractor. I've been a contractor, a licensed contractor in Lompoc since 1977 and worked years in town through partnerships and things in construction. The nightmare stories I could tell you would make the mayor's a very short, brief statement. But I won't do that. I'll just say that it's very inconsistent how the older buildings in town is or are looked at. I was involved in Mr. Nolan's. I lost that job. His son has a place on across from the donut shop on 8th Street there, and he was going to put a very nice building there. We had drawn plans for it, and we were ready, and it just wasn't going to fly. I sympathize with Randy Miller there. His house has been, I can understand how you can be taxed, how you can have a street address, which I believe the City of Lompoc Building Department issues, or at least they used to, issue the street addresses, not the post office. So how can you tell somebody that they have an electric meter, they're paying taxes on their property? The City of Lompoc issued them an address. How would you issue somebody an address if their building didn't exist? You know, those are things that I just find very strange, but they're not strange, they're very common. And I think that probably this is a good idea that the council can look at this and maybe come up, I don't know, a idea would be perhaps to accept everything the way it is. I don't mean that we should let people build buildings that were on the property line like they did when that building was built or close to it, but it's done. And to cause these people grief, let's look at the intent of all codes, and all ordinances have an intent. And the intent is not to punish. The intent, I believe, is to prevent future violations or future, say, we find out that this is not a good idea, having a building doing this. You don't go back and punish everybody that has a building that done that. You just go ahead, you say, okay, from this point on, you will not do that. We will not have anybody build something like that or put something like that in an area. But there is a thing called property rights. And I feel my building's 107 years old. And I'm told, and it has been consistently, it was built and operated as a, believe it or not, it made apple crates for the orchards in Santa Maria. The gentlemen that owned it were two brothers, and one of them was the first fire chief in Lompoc. And it has stayed consistent. It was also Moore Mill and Lumber at one time. It has always been a construction company. Now I'm told that if I go out of business or I want to pass my business on, I have to get a conditional use permit to continue doing or renting or selling it to someone to do what's been going on there for over 100 years. That just seems a little extreme to me. And I think that it's problems like this you need to address, and let's get let's get a problem solver. And I don't know that staff can do that. Not on their own. I think maybe you could have staff do that, bring suggestions to you, but I think you also need some community feedback too, maybe from businesses and property owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
I guess what I'd like to talk about is what Lompoc was prior to our growth. Moore Mill and Lumber was there. Across the street from that was SP Milling Company, where the little dance studio office is at now. That was their sales office. And you also had a huge big lumber yard in there that's no longer there, but it's all industrial type stuff. So what happens when the gentleman builds the new building there on the corner of G and Locust? The people across the street complain about it because it's a business thing. Well, in 1948, when JM built all those houses, you had the railroad there, and every night that engine sat there with its steam puffing and going on, and they changed the cars down there, not up on the hill and one thing another. All industrial, that whole corridor through there. Now they tell me you can't have any industrial type buildings on Laurel Avenue like where the plumbing shop was at. He can't go in there and have that. He's got to convert it to housing. How dumb is that when you've got that track laying there, and sometime in the future you may be starting building parts to launch out at Vanderburg? We missed a great opportunity down there at Lompoc Lumber's location when we allowed that to go into housing instead of keeping it industrial. It had a railroad spur and everything else. Just think what could be sitting there now, that 25,000 square foot building that's in Goleta with the overhead crane and one thing. None of the manufactured stuff to launch out of Vandenberg. All they'd have to do is bring the flat car in, put it on, and take it out there. But no. So yeah, we need to look at what Lompoc was and should be. Back to this zoning with R2 and one thing another in 215 East Locust Avenue. That little two units of one bedroom apartments have been there since 1936 that I know of. I didn't know it in 36, but I know now because I had lived there twice, once in 36 and once when we got married. Across the street, what have you got? But one of the old Moores home up there, probably one of the wealthiest guys in Lompoc. So they existed way back then. And then on the corner of G and Locust, you have that complex that belongs to the Oh, I can't think of his names right now, but Lewis has built it. And that's been there forever. So what's wrong with all this R2 stuff if some guy builds another unit on his house, and as long as he's a local yokel? But if you've got some guy down in Santa Barbara building stuff up here in Renton, he's not taking care of it. That's where most of this bad property is at, is out-of-town landlords, as you well probably know. So we need to look at who's doing what and talk about Lompoc downtown. You know, prior to the growth with Vandenberg coming, we had 2 tractor dealers in the 100 block of North I Street. You had the Chevrolet dealer there on the corner of, Walnut? Across the street was Monty's Auto Parts in those days. Then you had Stan's Automotive. You had the Chevrolet dealer downtown, and Beatty's old building is still there, but they were downtown on, back there where the Toyota dealer's at now, in about the middle of that block as the Ford dealer. All these things happen. I wonder if we had planning back then. I think it was just somebody bought a piece of land and put a building on it. Seemed to work out pretty well. And as far as downtown businesses with offices on the ground floor, well, I'll tell you, you had all kinds of real estate offices down there, insurance offices, and guess what? These people went to lunch every day. If you went in the morning to strike up a sales with your real estate agent, probably went to lunch with them, or over across the street in the Lompoc Theater building, there was a little coffee shop. This was happening downtown then. What do we got going down there now? Not much. I don't know what happened to us, but it all changed. And the other thing is, you know, you put the requirements on these new buildings and one thing and another. You take, there's a couple body shops in town right now that are pretty nice. Monty's down there that was mainline. He started out real small in a building that wouldn't be approved nowadays. Same thing with Mr. Schuyler over there and his piece of property with his body shop and his storage unit there. He's done all right. That's a young guy that's, well, he's under 50, I know, because he's the same age as my son. But he's done all right. But he couldn't have done it if somebody really would have been down on him. And I don't know how he got through the process, but both of those guys started in buildings that really didn't meet the code. But back then, evidently, they got to the city somehow. That's like with my piece of property down on Ocean Avenue.
Wrap up, Arlen.
Pardon?
Your dinger went off. You got to quit.
I got to quit?
Yep.
Okay, I won't tell my story about that.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Next.
I'm Bobby Ranney, a local resident since 1966 and a business owner in town. And I wanted to comment on, first of all, I'd like to commend Mayor Lynn and thank him for coming up with possibly a solution or an idea at least that we can look at that's a little bit different, because obviously things are broken and need to be fixed. I just wanted to give an example. He mentioned mixed use, and mixed use right now for an owner, for a buyer, for a seller, they don't work. You cannot get lending on them. It's very, very difficult. There is a property in town that we had a buyer for. It's zoned mixed use, less than 20% commercial. We spent 2 months trying to find a lender on it. The buyer said, if I have to spend this much time now, if I buy this and I ever decide that I want to leave or I want to sell it, I'm going to be stuck with it because we're not going to be able to find another buyer. So there needs to be some changes in the zoning. I do agree with that. And I think that I also just want to mention that the downzoning of some of these properties, I mentioned this once before, but I really feel that there's a legal liability there if we start downzoning properties. For many years, when you went into City Hall and you looked at the map, or you even asked at a counter about the zoning, you were directed to the map that was wrong, considering that now they have an overlay over it saying these are all going to be changed. People bought properties being told by the city that it was a certain zoning. And so they bought it thinking that I'll be able to do this if it's an R3, build on it, or an R2. And now they want to downzone it to R2s from R3s and then R2s down to R1. There's someone else is going to mention too, that is a condo, fourplex. There's 4 condos on it, and they want to downzone it to an R2. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't help our community. I've been here a long time, and I've been involved in the community, and it's been really sad, I think, for me, for the last few years, to kind of see our community go down. It almost has a feeling as if it was starting to die because there's not a lot you can do. We're not getting new businesses in. We're not getting a lot of things. We're not getting the community itself needs jobs. We have people here that really need the work. We need to do something to help the community to grow. And I think by changing and focusing on some of the zoning problems at this time would be an excellent idea. I want to thank you for that and thank all of you for listening.
Good evening, Susan Gallagher, Mayor, Council members. A couple things tonight. A business owner, residential, live here and own properties here, and one of my properties is getting downzoned. Years ago, a developer put in condos, and it got past the city. Now it's being downzoned. That's one example. As a business owner, we have a property in the 400 block of South L Street. Bank took it back. It has a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house in the front and a converted garage studio in the back. Had utilities to it. My understanding is the city took the utilities away from it, and it can't go back in. You can't get a loan for it. It's got a kitchen and a bathroom. It's not legal conforming. It is on the auction on the computer, opening bid $25,000. Now, what does that do to the rest of the residents in that neighborhood? Because the people have gone to the city to ask questions, what about that back unit? No answers given, doesn't exist, can't get a loan, we're really broken. And I thank the mayor for his history lesson tonight. It's a sad history lesson. I'm ready for some happy around here. I love the clock. It looks good. I get excited every time I go by there, probably 10 times a day. And our job is to sell the city to people that want to buy property here. It's a hard job when you don't know what you're selling. Thank you for your time.
Come back and explain one thing to everybody, because I understand it, but I'm not sure everybody else does. When a property in a neighborhood sells for something that's dramatically less, how does that impact the appraisals for the rest of the neighborhood and financing those?
That appraisal will affect every property. And then the appraiser comes out and he looks at the subject property. Then he gets 6 properties, 3 listed, 3 sold, and he's trying to compare. Well, he doesn't know all this history behind it. The appraiser goes into the house he's appraising, or she, and that's it. The rest, they're looking on a piece of paper, and if that paper from a sale through the county, the city, or our systems doesn't explain it completely, they have no understanding. And these appraisers come from Aurora Grande past Ventura.
So what it does is it drives down the aggregate value, and then you find yourself with a house that you've agreed to pay $65,000 or $95,000 for that you can only get a loan for $85,000.
Or this house in particular cannot get a loan, period.
Yeah, it's
it
a
has
cash
to
sale
go
only.
cash.
Yeah.
And who's going to buy it not knowing what they can do with that second unit?
Randy Miller's looking for another one.
Okay. I don't know. All right, thank you.
Come on down.
Mayor, Council. My name's Tom Hinkins. I live at 1511 Megalito Canyon Road. I'm a real estate broker here in the valley and also own some properties in the area as well. Been helping people buy homes in the Lompoc Valley for almost 28 years. So the downzoning, the rezoning is creating a significant impact on some of the people that I've sold properties to. They bought these properties thinking they were going to be able to grow and thrive in the valley, and this simply is a taking of their ability to grow and establish a wealth maybe for themselves and for their family. I'd like to suggest that instead of having a mandated rezone, that perhaps there's some kind of an incentive program that will allow people to rezone on their own. Don't know really what it could be. Maybe a forgiveness of some of the taxes or the fees that would be involved with reconstructing a property. There's got to be some way that would be a positive way of making this rezone happen instead of a taking. I'd like to commend you, Mr. Mayor. You nailed it on your speech. I think I can speak for a lot of people here that you really summed it up, what the problem was here in our valley and what we have to look forward to. And I, for one, am excited to see that that's happening for you. We can all see properties in our valley and examples of homes and properties that are suffering from the rezone problems. There's one that I'd like to bring up, and it's the old DMV building. That property was used as the Department of Motor Vehicles over on North B for 35, 40, 50 years, not sure. But the current zoning on that property now limits that use of that property to another public facility or a crematorium. It's really limiting that property owner from using that property. So for the last 4 or 5 years, it's just, well, since the Department of Motor Vehicles moved, it's been vacant. People are still paying taxes, insurance, utilities are on. They can't use it. There's no hope for them. I'd like to see those kind of things change. I appreciate what you're doing for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Lynn, council member, my name is Pauline Imano, and I wanted to back up on Susan's thing. As a mortgage lender in the real estate business, downzoning properties practically kills that property and that homeowner's chance to ever do anything with that. It causes major red tape when it comes to lending on those properties when it's a legal non-conforming property. It can be done, but it's going to be a nightmare. And as we all know right now, lending is a nightmare anyways, just because of the way the values have dropped. With the more foreclosures that happen, and to kind of back up on your question about regarding appraisals, what happens when these properties go into foreclosure and the appraised value comes in lower, it brings everybody's value down. Rezoning the properties, especially those 600 properties, residential properties, will cause the values go down for all the neighboring community. Lompoc will probably cease to exist. You won't have anybody moving here. We won't be able to bring anybody in to buy properties. We really need to focus on what's going to bring people to Lompoc, what's going to bring jobs to Lompoc. Leave the properties as they are, R3s, R2s, whatever they are. Let the members, the community members, continue with their homes and not have to worry about losing that property and losing that value, because in the end, it's going to hurt us all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council people. I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak here. I agree with just about everything I've heard here tonight.
Joe, you got to tell them your name.
They don't know me? No. I'm Joe Bartow. Bartow Heating and Air Conditioning. I was born and raised here. I've been in business for over 25 years here, been in construction over 40 years. I think I pulled my first building permit in 1975. It was a lot easier then, by the way. I'm glad to see that this council and the mayor seem to be moving in the right direction. It just seems about time. I'd like to compliment them for that. And addressing the zoning, I'm involved in one of the buildings that's getting rezoned. Doesn't make any sense at all to me, or trying to be rezoned. You know, you buy a piece of property, you save money, you have a mortgage, you pay it off, you use it for the reason you bought it for, and you figure when you get old enough to retire, you'll be able to sell it and maybe make a profit on the building. Then you get hit with this after all this goes on, and you pay taxes, generate all kinds of people being employed by you, and then you get ready to retire and you're looking, well, what can I sell that for? After the rezoning, probably can't sell it at all. So I agree with everybody's complaints about this zoning. I don't think that anybody should be able to just come in and decide that they're going to change the zoning of a piece of property that's been that way for a long time and paid for it. And onto the trying to get business to come here. I think we need to realize we're in a competitive market to get any kind of growth or new buildings to come in, and this area here hasn't been very competitive at all with over the past few years. You see other communities that are doing a lot better than we are. I think we should have a sign hanging in the office there when people come in and they want to buy something or build something. Should have a sign that says, "How can I help you? How can I make this easy for you? How can I make it less expensive for you?" In the past, I think that it's read, "How can I stop you?" or "How can I make this difficult? How can I cost you more money? And if I can, how can I stop you?" That's been most of my experience. I know there has to be rules and regulations and guidelines or the place would be a mess, but I think we need to look at everything, maybe have a group that looks at everything individually. It's like this, you build something, then you get a list of what, I don't know, somebody sits in a room and makes up a list of what he thinks that building should be used for. I mean, there's hundreds of things on the list that just as the building could be used for just as easily as the things on the list. But, you know, once it's on there, to go through the conditional use permit, and that's no guarantee. So just not much incentive to invest, not knowing for sure what's going to become your property or what you can use it for or what you can rent it for. I've seen a lot of things that they make you do that just don't make sense. They don't help some of these requirements. They don't help the city. They don't help the safety of the building. They don't help anybody, but they're a rule and regulation, and you're going to have to do it no matter how much money it costs you. No one can tell you why you have to do it, or they might say, well, and in certain situations this could happen, but you're not in that situation, so it really shouldn't affect you. But anyway, that's just the way I've been seeing things happen here. I'm reluctant to even build anything anymore, so it's so complicated and frustrating, and I've been through it lots of times. For example, this building we just built over on 300 North F. Randy landscaped it the same way we landscaped the building down the street where our office is. I got a beautification award for that, but they don't like the landscaping in the new building, and I had to do something different there. So, you know, what makes the sense here? So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I got to tell my landscaping story. Once upon a time, I tried to build a building in Lompoc at 904 North H. I bought the property. I went through everything, and I started with the city, and we were at $320,000 to build the building, which we could afford and pay rent on for the tire store. And by the time we were done, we were at $600,000. I couldn't figure out how we were going to pay that. And the final last straw was that I wanted to plant a nice big oak tree out front. This was going to be a $2,000 oak tree in 1985, so you can imagine how big a tree it was. And the staff said, no, you're going to plant a Brazilian pepper because it grows faster. And that was when we threw our hands up and we gave the property back, and we sucked up $35,000-ish worth of money we'd spent and just went on with our lives because it was obvious that this was never going to work out. So, yeah. Anybody else left? Seeing no one. Who was first? Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank all the public comments that we heard tonight, and I took down some notes. And I would say the first priority of business here is the issue of downzoning. This council talked about this about a year ago, and we came to no resolution because it was clearly an issue and a problem, particularly since it had been going on, particularly in my view, was because there were many property owners that bought these properties with the perception that that was the right zoning, and that was just flat out wrong. The responsibility was really on the city to let them know that they were non-compliant. So I do have some issues with that. That is, again, something that is coming back this year. We need to resolve it. The mayor brought up a couple of more issues. The public comments brought up a couple that I think they need to be dealt with. Commercial zoning needs to be simplified. We need to discuss the industrial park zoning as to whether we expand it and where it should be. The conditional use permit is causing a lot of heartache. There is no question about it. So that has to be dealt with, either gotten rid of or something. And finally is the mixed use. That's what I come up with of what I heard from public comments tonight and comments of what's going on here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major planning issues. Now, there are many property owners, business owners in this town that they all want to have their problem resolved. It would be, we cannot go property by property by property. That would be, we'll be here for the next 6 years, right? So that's not something that we can do. So we have to go back to basically the policy and look at how are we going to resolve down zoning, how are we going to change commercial zoning, how are we going to change the industrial park zoning, what are we going to do about the conditional use permit, and what are we going to do about mixed use, and focus on that. I still think that we need expertise. We do need to have the public hearings and hearing every single resident that wants to speak about their problem. But we also need to hear the experts that says what can be done and not done. I don't know. I'd be flat out, I'm not an expert in planning. I don't know, what is the right commercial zoning for the city. I can hear public input with specific issues, but I need comparison with other towns, which that means that the planning staff is going to have to do a study to compare other cities. I will need legal counsel as to what is allowed and not allowed. So there is a lot of information that has to come in here before a policy can be established. How are we going to do that? Because that's really what our job here is let's get all the information so we can establish a new policy. And these are the 5 issues as far as I can tell. And that could take us, this agenda item was about establishing a schedule, and there is 4 meetings. These 5 issues is going to take far more than, 4 meetings. And that was only supposed to be addressed in January 24th. So forget about January 31st with the language of shall and should and the expansion areas, and then the phase 1 elements and all the other stuff. I mean, we have a major problem here before we can even move to the rest of the general plan update. So, this recommendation and this staff report has really nothing to do with what we're hearing here tonight. Right? Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
we're on the same page.
So now we need to sit down and say, okay, we're making ourselves available to certain dates, and we need to recognize what the issues are, and then we need to send off the staff, the legal counsel, to provide information so the public can hear it and the council can decide. We can do our personal research, we can hear communities, we can decide to do another single purpose committee. We already have gone that route. We didn't get anywhere. The single purpose committee did not address any of these issues, even though their purpose was to simplify the planning process. Okay? So we kind of didn't get there because it's complex, it's detailed, it takes a lot of time. So we need to think about what we're going to do here. And this staff report doesn't even resemble, or has nothing to do with what the real issue is that is being discussed tonight.
I think with regard to the staff report, I came around the corner with them on this, so there was no. I don't blame them for not being ready to talk about these things, because this is just an accumulation of my thoughts over a long period of time, and finally getting 2 weeks to sit there and think about it, which is pretty unusual. We don't usually get much time. So I agree with most of what you say, and as a matter of fact, I think I agree with all of it. And I have one thought, but I want to give Councilmember Costa her light on first, so she gets next cut at the apple.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I have a very similar conjecture as Councilmember Martiner, just with a different logic. The logic that I came in as I'm listening to public comment has to do a lot with references to our city staff. Now, although I understand when you reference they, you may be referencing city staff. But what I would like to clarify is when you reference they, you're referencing us. Because for me, this is clearly and concisely a policy issue. What our city staff is doing is simply fulfilling the job that we told them to do. So when you're getting turned away and are upset, rightfully so, it is not necessarily because of their opinion or their steadfastness. It's more of a policy decision made on our behalf. Now, I would have hoped that in those cases you came to council to express your opinions, and it sounds like some of you have, and I appreciate that. Apparently, past councils haven't listened that well, but we're not that council. So I wanted to clarify, for me, it was very important that it's very easy to point fingers, but the finger needs to be pointed at us and keep us accountable, hold us accountable for doing this as we're committing to do this. So I agree it's clearly a policy issue, and I agree that it's going to take more than one meeting. Councilmember Martiner, I think the 5 that you discussed are the 5
after this
that keep occurring, possibly with more. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Okay, so my first suggestion is, number one, I firmly believe that, and I think we've all said it, except for Dirk, who never speaks a lot, that the buck stops here and we need to work on this. And I think after my soliloquy and the testimony from all of those out here and thinking back to 100 other things. I mean, I could sit and talk about this till about 1:30, but we're both sick, so we're not going to. The first step is that we actually can't do anything, and we need to fix it so we can. Because the way our current amendment ordinance is written, the only way we can amend a zoning ordinance is for that amendment to go to the Planning Commission and be acted on there and come back to us. And so, although I don't want to sidestep the Planning Commission over the long haul, because I think that's a good process, I think when you're in the middle of a general plan update, you need a different process. And from that standpoint, my first recommendation tonight would be that we instruct the city attorney to come back at our next meeting with an amendment to the zoning ordinance amendment process that allows the council to amend the zoning ordinance directly without sending it to the Planning Commission during the general plan update process, so that we don't open a door forever, but we open a door to solve this problem for this council and a future council. And so there's my first thought, and I would make it a motion if we could have a second to talk about it.
I'll move.
Yeah, I'll go back and start over it again. Yeah. To direct the city attorney to bring back an amendment to the amendment process of the zoning ordinance to allow the council, during the period of time that they are working on the general plan update, that would be this council and future councils, to directly amend the zoning ordinance. Okay, and I'm sorry, did you second? Okay, so we have a motion and a second.
We didn't have a second.
Okay, I did the move, so you can do the second. Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and now some discussion. I'm sorry, Bob, you had your light on when I started talking. Excuse me, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I just had a couple of comments. I'll go back to what Councilmember Costa was saying, that we set the policies and the staff only implements our policies. I'd like to make one sort of clarification on that. I think Mr. Warner used the word intent. And this is where I think we have a little bit of a problem, because yes, we do set policies, but sometimes the intent of the policy is not what is actually carried out, and that's where common sense, I think, has to come in. So I think whenever we set a policy, the staff has to understand the intent of that policy and then use common sense in implementing it. That was my only comment, but I agree with you that it is our policy and it is the staff's responsibility then to carry it out. The other thing I want to say is, if I had a magic wand in our process, we're all thinking about how we're going to do this. I'd like to put the city map up on the board and sort of design our ideal city plan. And then once we design our ideal city plan, then start picking out, okay, it can't be, like industrial can't be in this area because we have this residential block, and then we sort of make an exception for that. But I mean, sort of take a look at what we'd like to see our city look like, and then try to come as close to that as possible. I don't know if that's possible, but if we had a magic wand, I'd like to at least kind of consider that. The other thing, while I've got the microphone, I need to discuss tonight, we all keep talking about the 24th, and I'd like the council to consider a change on the 24th. Well, I'll come back to that. Just let's not leave before we talk about the 24th.
No, absolutely. And I want to talk about getting these prioritized in everybody's perception. And the one thing I would say is the one issue, besides what Councilmember Martner talked about, would be to add the subject of existing buildings and then some policy about how we declare a building exists, just to make these long ongoing. Yeah, however you want to call it, grandfathering or whatever. I'd like to make them, I don't know. No, they just need to be there. I mean, if you've been paying taxes on it since 1954, then obviously it exists. And we just need to come to a resolution. And I don't know where the line in the sand needs to be, if it's a date, if it's a number of years, whatever it is. I want to have some more discussion on that. But that's just one other thing I want to add to the list. Councilmember Martin, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a motion on the floor, and I think we need to vote on it. And I guess I want to clarify and discuss the motion, and then we can move on to the rest. So this would be basically an amendment. It's sort of like an exception that the council can do this during only the general plan update discussions. Okay.
That is my motion. I think we need to open a door wide enough to get the job done, but we have the other policy for all the rest of the time. Is there any other discussion on that? And could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. The next thing I would like to do, with the council's kind consent, is to take the 6 items that we talked about and try to get the cart and the horse in the right order. And the reason I say that is, if we started off down a zoning road, if we started off down a land use change road, but we hadn't made the decision on how we would like the zoning to look, then it's going to be very difficult to make that land use decision. And I think we have the commercial zones, which would include C2, PCD, CC, CO, MU, and Old Town Commercial. And all of those together are the 6 zones that currently make up non-industrial, non-residential commercial. And that's the one where we have the biggest, I don't know, there are too many zones and there are too many restrictions, and it just doesn't work anymore. And I would like to take that group of things on first and have some discussion about how we could consolidate, reduce, and maybe we can't get down to 1 zone, maybe we can get down to 2. Maybe we can't, maybe we have to get down to 3, but we can surely do better than 6, and we could write the ordinance to accomplish more than one thing. A C2 ordinance can have an option for mixed use in it. I mean, it can, you don't have to have it, but within your C2, you could have residential. And if you chose to have it, these are the parameters, and these parameters make sense and they're financially viable. And if you have an existing building, then and you want to change the facade on it, then that does have to go to the Planning Commission, because you're changing what the public sees. And if you're changing the footprint beyond a certain amount, then that has to go to the Planning Commission, because that affects a lot of other things. But if you're changing the use, or you're just putting a new office in the building, we don't care about that. We want to facilitate you. And so all of those kind of go together for me in the commercial group, all of those zones. And then the next group would be the 2 industrial zones and the restrictions that we feel are necessary there, and whether or not we can have 1 industrial zone, or if we truly need 2. And if we need to, what do we need to do to simplify the process in business parks that you can actually use it, and we don't end up with a building like Pactuco, new name, not Fagerdala, no, name after that. Anyway, the building that we have, where we have 200 parking spaces and all this landscape space, and it made the building much more expensive. And so I think that's the second one I would like to see. And with regard to reducing the CUPs, I think we can tackle that as we do each of these groups of zones. And then I think the next step might be to take on the existing, or the downzoning,
residential.
The existing the properties that don't have a birth certificate, I guess is the only way I can describe them.
Well, the way you're kind of breaking it down, commercial, and then within the commercial component, mixed use, CUP, existing buildings can be discussed. Then there is the industrial, and then the other one would be residential.
Residential, you're right.
Residential.
Absolutely.
So within the residential, there will be the down zoning issues that may come up within the residential and mixed, whatever, existing buildings, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But maybe the thing to do is to go commercial, industrial, residential. And within each of those categories, the subcategories deal with the conditional use permits, the mixed use issues, the grandfather clauses, the existing buildings, and all of that kind of thing.
I think that's very good. I think that's spot on. Does anyone have discomfort with dealing with commercial first and then taking industrial and residential? Councilmember Costa.
Mayor Lynn, can we please get some input from planning staff as to their preference, if that would be okay with them, just to confirm? Ms. Breeze?
Just taking notes and wanting to follow the way the council direction goes. We can work with however the council directs.
The reason I ask is because I know that there's actually a lot of non-controversial properties that need to be zoned correctly, just for bookkeeping purposes, essentially. And would you prefer we get those out of the way, or do those intermittently, or?
Oh, it sounds like there's going to be a general change, and we really are going to need to evaluate, because it's going to affect the general plan. All of the categories that are listed in the general plan will also have to be reviewed. It's going to be a substantial effort.
Right, I'm sorry. By non-controversial, I meant things that would be required to change, like the the uses, municipal uses and things like that. Those kinds of things. You'd rather wait until we've done the general change and do those at the very end?
Because it could affect some of the changes that are proposed, depending on what categories the council comes up with and how they would like to see those uses identified. If you cut down the number of commercial uses and zoning districts, we will have to look at the corresponding uses in the general plan to make sure that we have consistent uses, because they both need to be consistent.
Great. So as long as council understands that when you're looking at the map, there may be some parcels on there that should be changed, rightfully so, for those kinds of things. We might want to point that out when we're going through those maps. Thank you.
Microphone. Is everybody comfortable with that sequence of events? And then the fourth one I would add would be the PF and all of the other catch-up stuff that are left over at the end. Public facilities and, yeah, it's what Councilmember Costa was talking about. So the fourth one would be, not being impolite, but the left. Yeah. The leftovers would be the last category. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay, then I think our next round would be at the next council meeting, if you could have that ordinance amendment for us. It's not very complex. And then if we would take the January 24th meeting, and that would be for our discussion of commercial. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
When we made that, or when we chose that, the 24th, and I did agree on it, and if, I'm sorry, my NCPA meeting was scheduled for Thursday the 26th. That turns out to be it's one of the 3-day meetings, so right now it's the 24th through the 26th. If the council is available on Monday the 23rd, so you're not available?
No, I teach on Mondays and Wednesdays for the next 5 months.
Good.
Evenings.
Teleconference?
Yeah, I could teleconference it then.
No, I want everybody here. I have the same problem you have, and I'm going to drive up. I'll skip the first day and drive up after the meeting. This is the most important thing that we will do. If we don't want, if it's inconvenient and we waited till what's the following one, the 31st, I don't think that matters. One more week isn't going to make a big difference in our lives, and I want all of us here so that we can all weigh in on this and we can all bring our knowledge to the party. Please.
So I would like to make a motion, if the council is ready, that we actually do not have the 24th meeting, and our first meeting will be the 31st.
Okay.
That would work. Thank you.
Okay. And could we look at our schedules now and get 2 more dates for industrial and residential, so that people could start knowing when we're going to do these things? City Administrator, I know this is a long ways out, but do we have heavy schedules for the February meetings, or are we pretty light, not counting whatever Joe does to us for redevelopment? We're all just going to say, yeah, whatever, because we don't understand what you're saying anyway. Are any of those regular meetings light enough that we could bring some of this on? Because the industrial is not a huge one.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, may I just ask a question for clarification, please?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know what the council would like to see us return with for your discussion purposes. Are you looking at, as Councilmember Martiner suggested, a comparison of other cities, a survey and a study that we have to go out and analyze additional information? I ask because we have pretty strict timelines according to when we have to turn our staff reports in order to get them back on the council agenda. So I would just like to know what your expectation is for us.
I think my expectation is that you would bring us some information from surrounding cities, and we would take that into consideration as we look at our alternatives. Councilmember Martiner.
I would also would like to see a couple of proposals on how to simplify the commercial zoning. So if the staff can do some research and provide a couple of proposals to the council for discussion. It may take more than one meeting. The council may provide, more input with changes and whatever, but that's going to be the process. We need a starting point. This is the proposal. We looked at the cities. This is the process today. If you, we think that we can simplify it, we can reduce the commercial zoning to 1 or 2, etc. That's kind of what I'm looking for, and I ideally would like to see that.
Okay.
Mr. Beer, members of council, with that information and all of the requests and the additions that have been brought into this, could we come back to you with a staff report and a timeline to compile that information? And we could put some dates according to your calendar on this?
That's a good idea because you will need to do a lot of background work and you will need to actually look for some proposals. I think a good starting point is January 31st. And then at that time, have the staff discuss, this is our timeline and this will be the future meetings for, yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to that idea.
And give us an opportunity to discuss it in a little more depth, too. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we'll set January 31st as the meeting to discuss all 4 of these subjects, and the staff will come back to us with some preliminary discussion. And a timeline, yeah. And 7 p.m. okay, or you guys want earlier? What do you want? 7 o'clock, okay. So I need a motion and a second for that, please. For January 31st to begin this process.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to begin this process on January 31st with an outline from the staff and kind of a timeline into the future, and then we can have a little more in-depth discussion, and we'll focus, all of us will focus our effort on talking to folks about the commercial at the front end of it. Okay, is there any other discussion on that? And could we vote, please? Okay, thank you very much. Teresa, is there anything other action you need us to take this evening with regard to this? You can just say no. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
No, I
Okay.
think.
And city administrators, any other action you need us to take?
No.
Probably way more than enough fun already, huh? Okay, well, I'd like to thank all of you for bearing with me during my 2-hour soliloquy, particularly Councilmember Costa. I wish to report that, well, we have to have closing oral communication. Anybody out there has something they want to say? Come on down, Larry. You get 2 minutes this time. What?
Actually, this is a question for Councilmember Martiner. Twice you referred to the single action committee as not fixing it. And did you mean I was on a single action commission.
Yeah, she's talking. I don't think it was within your direction.
No, I wasn't taking it personal. I'm just saying that we weren't asked to fix anything. We were asked to look at the overall why people felt that the city of Lompoc was not a pleasant place to come into the city buildings department, planning department, engineering, be a mall. And I would say this to the council: if you do appoint a committee, maybe get back to the committee and let them know or ask them questions, because I didn't receive any questions really from any council member on anything we came up in that. And really, I don't see many implementations of what we suggested also. But I will say this: the attitude has changed, I think, to the better. And that was we felt was the biggest problem in dealing with the city. So I was just trying to say we weren't asked to fix anything. We were just asked to make suggestions. So I'm not quite sure what you meant by that.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Mayor, City Council members, first, just like to commend you for the direction that you're taking, but also just a little note that some of the problems, specifically like in the zoning, were created when the general plan was started and then not finished within a timely fashion. So in light of the direction you're going, to keep in mind that we still need to get the general plan done as soon as possible. just a quick note. Thank you.
Thank you. One more. Anybody else left? Stand up and come on down.
Mayor and Council, I'd like to thank you for having the courage to approach this problem, at least, because the real estate lady who said this could turn us into a ghost town wasn't that far off. You can see that from the empty businesses and the empty housing. It's just incredible that this could happen to this community. I see the in lieu of rule that Santa Barbara has used to ship low-income housing to Lompoc. That happens a lot. We've become the place to put that, instead of a place where upward mobile people want to live, because there's industries and things like that where you can get a job and stores where you can shop. That's fast disappearing in this community. It worries me, because I made an investment here. I'd like to see it prosper. Thank you very much for your attention to this.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going, gone. Okay. Meeting reports. I had 4 meetings. I used no city money. Councilmember Costa.
I actually have a quick item that I wanted to request. As actually previously mentioned by Councilmember Lingle during this meeting, you referenced about purchasing local, that we could have purchased a shredder local, correct? Or we could have paid for the service of a local shredder instead of going, where was it? We went out of town somewhere. San Luis Obispo. And so this is actually something that I've gotten a lot from our community, that, we talked very briefly about the buy local idea, and although I know that that's probably something that will be discussed by the commission, or if not, maybe it's a miscellaneous topic. But I think that we're talking about reviewing policies, is we need to review our policy about the city's purchasing. I've just had a lot of local business owners tell me, if you want your customers to buy local, you should be living that philosophy as well. So I understand that. Is it on there already? I didn't even see that.
Coming up.
Oh, right. So that's contract bidding, though. That's not anything less than a contract would just be purchasing, correct? So I don't think that will be inclusive. So I don't know if we can make that inclusive, or if it's something we even feel needs to be looked at. I understand when we're doing these things, a lot of times it's about cost savings. So I know that it's a give and take. You want a healthy fiscal situation, so you want to save the money. You also want to reinvest those tax dollars into your local economy. But I do think that there's a balance, and right now, I think the balance is tipping us in one way a little bit too far, and that's purchasing everything, not everything, but purchasing quite a few items outside of town. I can tell you a personal story that Mr. Bedford was a little upset when he saw that we got Nissan Leafs instead of Chevy Volts, even though we have a Chevy dealer in town, and that would have been tax dollars regenerated for the city. Now I understand that there may be reasons for the Leaf being full electric and the Volt not, and I get it. There can be small details done that way, but I wanted to review it because of that. And the second thing I wanted to mention really quickly is I'm hoping that Ken will come to our next meeting to give us an update. But Ken, if we want to request something minimal that he add on to his updates, is that a contract change, or could we just simply request that he do that?
You certainly could request it, and if he'd agree, or if you tell me what it is you want to request, I could see if it already fits into the language that's in the contract, and then it's an obligation that he has to abide by, not just agree to.
Well, in the updates that we were given, I'd be really interested to actually have him recognize by name the new businesses that have opened. So I know Marshall's is a big deal that it's coming, but that's a big business. I'm talking about there's some really great small businesses out there, and so maybe if it's a grand reopening, or maybe if it's a grand opening, or maybe it's a special event or something like that to try to recognize our small businesses. I was just driving by. I was leaving urgent care this morning, and there was this really cool internet gaming small business. I didn't even see it was there, and I just happened to pass by. So I wish that we would have announced that somehow publicly. So I didn't know if you could announce business openings or things like that included in that, or if we request it, maybe he'll do that. I just want to do that.
Chamber liaison, put him to work.
Yeah, no, I'll absolutely go talk to him, and if nothing else, I'll do it in an official capacity at their board of directors at the end of the month.
if we can get consensus, I would appreciate that, because I think that that's just a very small little.
I think they would be more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Hey, anybody else got a report? Councilmember Martiner, you got one, or no?
I just real quick, I wanted to congratulate Nicholas Schmidt. He did complete the Frisbee golf course up at Beatty Park, and it's being well used, I must say. A lot of people are using it, and there's some guy that's been working out on A&O Ocean named Dave, and I don't know who he is. He's there early in the morning. I got to say that if you drive by, he's painted the flower pots, he's cleaned up, he does everything. I think I should tip my hat to this guy, and I think he should face traffic, but he's doing a good job cleaning up that part of town. Thanks, Dave.
Councilmember Lingle?
No city money spent.
Let me go down that road for you, because I actually have a couple things on that subject, and I'll talk to the purchasing department about it, because I discovered something the other day where we could actually pay exactly the same price and get it from somebody else in a store here in town, got credit for it, and I forgot all about it, and now I'll jump back on it, and then I'll come back with that answer. Okay, we are therefore adjourned to the council meeting of January 17th at 5:30 for closed session. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. We are adjourned to the special meeting of January 10th at 7 p.m.